Yes. Good evening and welcome to the Thursday, January 5th, 2023 regular meeting of the school committee. I would invite all those who are present to please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So tonight we do have Holly is participating remotely. Is she in the Zoom?
She is.
Holly, can you hear us okay? Just want to make sure that she's... Does she nod? Okay.
Is she muted?
She is, but there will likely be a little bit of a delay if she's watching.
Okay, so there could be a little bit of a delay. So if just to make sure that we get to her when we'll maybe swing back to her when we're doing comments on different things, not first. So we'll start with public comment. If there are members here,
I can.
Can you
hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Holly. If
Hello?
there's anybody who would like to come up for public comment, you can come on up. And just for Holly's benefit, there is a little bit of a delay from when you speak and hear us. Okay, anybody for public comment? And comments on different things. Welcome. If you could just state your name for the record and then count of residents, and then we keep it to 3 minutes. And Amanda, are you our timekeeper this evening?
Sure. I'm Kellyanne Mazur. I'm from Westboro, Mass. I'm a Hopkinton Middle School teacher. About 22 years ago, I sat down with the principal and the special education team chair of the middle school for an interview. Through my nerves and facing one of just a few interviews after graduating college, I still remember a question and my response pretty clearly. I was asked what I plan to bring to Hopkinton Middle School as a special educator. My response was patience and being an advocate for my students. I'm reflecting on the answer of being an advocate. I never would have thought that I would have to sit in front of a school committee and administrators to advocate for my students' needs and services. Let me tell you what my role was like when I started in Hopkinton 22 years ago. I had a caseload of about 10 students, and I did not have any pull-out students to service. We had a Wilson reading teacher in the building who did the Wilson instruction for the students that required it based on their IEP. I did have testing to do for reevaluations, but it took maybe 2 hours of my schedule to get it completed. Over the years, the special education staff has adjusted to practice, learned from consultants, and said, yes, we will do whatever we need to do for our students. This includes adding new batteries of testing for reevaluations, being trained and then implementing new reading strategies, collecting and analyzing data so that we can make changes to instruction as needed, learning new writing and math criteria to ensure that we are keeping up to date with the general education curriculum. Over time, our pullout groups have grown larger. The amount of pullouts we do has increased, but we keep bending over backwards to do whatever we need to do for our students. My caseload is now 15 students. I teach 2 Wilson reading groups and 1 math lab, oversee the 4 curriculum areas on my team, and we now spend 4 to 6 hours testing, never mind the report writing, IEP writing, scheduling of meetings, and monitoring students for their own social, emotional well-being and mental health. So when a consultant comes in to say that co-teaching is not happening at HMS, it is 100% accurate. I'm not sure how it could be. I don't have a second in my day to plan for co-teaching. I do take pride in ensuring that I am a teacher for all students. I've committed myself to the curriculum so that I can teach in small groups within the classroom and support the students so they feel a sense of belonging in a classroom setting. We have kept the individualized and IEP to just that, individualized. We have maintained the guidelines for paperwork and implemented new paperwork pretty seamlessly because we are also dealing with a state document that requires a careful attention. We have said yes over and over again. We now have the new state format of IEP writing looming over us, which seems daunting given everything we already do. I have always enjoyed working in Hopkinton because we do what is best for the students. Unfortunately, it is taking a toll on the staff. We at Hopkinton Middle School need another specialist in the building who is trained in reading approaches to alleviate just some of the weight we are carrying. Thank you to the parents, general ed teachers, counselors, paraprofessionals, and ABA techs. We value your support and know that you are there to make our students shine and feel part of this wonderful community. To conclude, I continue to advocate and be patient even after 22 years in the district. I hope we all take that message moving forward and do what is best for our Hopkinton students.
Thank you. Anybody else here who would like to make a public comment? Okay. Seeing none, then we'll move into reports. We can move our student council report later. To give Robert a chance to get here and move right into your report.
Okay. This will be a very quick superintendent's report tonight. We are just getting back from vacation, so things haven't really started to heat up. So I thought I would take this moment in the new year to celebrate the admin team. One of the things that's true about our admin team is that over the last 2 years' time, 50% of our leadership team is new to us. So whether that means new building principals, new assistant superintendent, lots of new assistant principals, we have a very changed landscape, I guess. And so we're kind of in that place where we're learning to work with one another. So yesterday we had the good fortune of inviting Tony Bent in to do some professional learning with the leadership team. One of the things he started with is a compass activity, and if you know the compass activity, you are defined as either a north, south, east, or west, and there are attributes, and you go through, a series of which would you prefers, and you are deemed either a north, a south, or east, or a west. But the very nice thing about it is you find commonality with the people who are like you, but then you also get to this place where you start to admire the traits in some of the other people. So when you think about, being a north, for example, and being super fast-paced and task-oriented and assertive and competitive, and you're just going 100% of the time. When you look over at a south who can be really process-centered and sort of slow and methodical and take the time to sort of smell the roses, you say, wouldn't it be nice to be a south? So it was a lovely morning with Tony. He leaves us with that kind of message that there is beauty in the service, and I don't think that is true just for administrators. I think that's true for you as school committee members, and I think that's true for all of our educators and our nurses and our custodians and our cafeteria workers, our tech specialists, everybody in our district, and I like to start with that in the new year. It's, I think, a really powerful message. The last thing Tony left us with is some reading assignments, and so those are some of the texts that he recommended to us. But it was a really nice day, and we all had an opportunity to kind of go through a poem and pick out parts that were meaningful to our leadership. So thank you to the admin team, and it's nice to start coming together that way, and thank you to Tony Beth, and thank you to all of you. So that's all I have.
That's great. I imagine it must be nice to have a mix of different north, south, east, west
Oh my gosh.
on the team. A strength to have.
Yep. Not a spoiler alert, the three of us are not the same.
No.
I won't tell you if we're north, south, east, or west, but we were in different groups.
I need
We
to
should
request
guess later. Yeah.
that
I know.
list, please.
Yeah.
I really want to spend some time looking at it.
Sure.
All right, then that brings us into the school committee chair report. I'll start with payroll warrants 23-012 and 23-013 were approved. Warrants 23-028, 23-029, and 23-030 were approved. A copy of the warrants has been included in your packet. So it was a busy break, just in terms of a lot of things going on, a lot of people working probably hundreds of hours cumulatively on budget-related stuff. I did have the opportunity to meet with, yesterday with the middle school staff regarding the grade configuration with Dr. Kavanaugh. Dr. Kavanaugh actually did most of the talking. I didn't have a lot to add, but And in addition, as you know, there were meetings that took place just before break with our speech and language pathologists, our OTs and our PTs, as well as meetings that we had with CPAC earlier this week and meetings with the HTA. So I feel like everybody has been working really hard, and I think everybody's got that focus of our students, and we're, as we know, we're going into the budget recommendation and committed to moving forward with our budget as a group here. So that's all that I had. Are there liaison reports? I think there might be some ESBC type.
Well, I think Perkins Eastman is going to mostly give you the liaison report.
Fair enough.
Yep, I would agree.
Okay.
And I don't have any.
Okay.
But thank you for all the meetings that you have been in on our behalf.
It was truly, an honor to be able to represent us on that, with those groups of people, so. That brings us then into our district-wide study, and I think we have Perkins Eastman on that computer over there, or on Zoom or something.
I believe they're attending live.
Oh, they are?
Yes, Bob must be here, I think.
Okay.
Oh, not yet.
They're not here right now.
All right,
Yeah,
so
so
do we want to do a quick thing?
I had sent them the agenda, so.
If we're ahead of, do we want to
Right.
go, because the budget recommendation is probably a lengthy conversation, do we want to go into the Model United Nations intent to travel?
Yes.
And do
Yeah.
some
Oh,
of the-
surely. Yep, that's an easy one. The Model UN wants to do an overnight travel, and that is in February. And so they just, they know that they're a little bit tight on the timeline, but they are looking for you to approve that trip.
Any questions?
High school students.
I have none. I think it's a fantastic trip, so. And it's local. It's,
Yep. So, just to give a delay, I don't know if Holly has anything that she would like to, anything, Holly, that you would like to ask? I'm gonna say no on that, and then we can go ahead and do a roll call vote since Holly is remote. And I will start with you, Jen, and hope that
Yes.
the lag gets to Holly in time. So Jen?
Yes.
Leah?
Yes.
Amanda?
Aye.
I am a yes. Holly, if you can hear us? Can she hear us through the Zoom? Holly, can you hear us for a vote on? Okay. Holly, if you can hear us?
Yeah, I'm a
Okay.
yes.
All right, thank you very much, Holly.
Can she hear us through the
I
Zoom?
do not need to hear myself for sure. So do we want to do the proposed ATM warrant article?
Absolutely.
That's great.
Or, do you want
there
me
we
to
go.
put it on the screen or just talk to it? I can
Given-
speak to it.
Speak to it.
Yeah,
That's
otherwise
okay.
Bob will have to change the wires
Right,
again.
yeah, I don't want to do that.
Oh,
Oh, no.
that's okay, Bob.
Bob, you could leave it.
Too late. Still take a minute for it to come up anyway.
Okay, at the last school committee meeting, we talked about a couple of warrant articles. What I've brought back to you for tonight is one that it seemed the reception was fairly easy. So again, this is future financial planning. And currently, the district is only able to negotiate a term of 3 years for any service. And there's times when a period that is longer than 3 years is more cost beneficial. And the example that I had given you was a 3-year term for a textbook license. The cost was $36,000 or $12,000 a year. But if we were able to take that out to a 6-year term, the cost was $48,000 or $8,000 a year. So the only way to take these terms to longer than 3 years is a town meeting warrant article. So this is the article that was in your packet last time, which basically is asking for several different ones. Digital curriculum, which would be educational programs, courses, curricula, software, technology equipment lease, and school bus transportation. Those are the three most common that you see other districts have done. So in order to be able to take those terms longer than 3 years, we would need town meeting approval. So this is the language that was used legally by other districts. Again, it will have a legal review when it's added to the warrant. But this one is for school committee's consideration.
Are there questions?
No, this seems like it shouldn't even require a vote, but yes, it just,
Yeah.
it makes perfect sense if it's gonna save the town and the schools many thousands of dollars, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. Do we have a motion then to approve the proposed ATM warrant article for future financial planning on contracts?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
So motion by Jen, a second by Leah. We'll do a roll call just to give Holly the heads up. We're coming for you last. Jen?
Yes.
Leah?
Yes.
Amanda?
Aye.
I am an aye. And Holly? Okay. I think rather than wait on that, we'll go with the a 4-0 vote on that.
Okay.
I do not believe she had any questions on that. Are we ready to go into?
Yeah, so just to,
Amanda, I am an aye. Yes. Holly?
Okay.
5-0.
All right, so we are 5-0. Thank you.
So just to give some preempt to the next kind of discussion on warrant articles, there were two other articles that I had brought before you before, and we have time. We have until the end of January, so we have several school committee meetings to consider this. One was the use of the central office gift account funding towards the track and field design engineering. That one actually would not be a warrant article, but that would be part of the motion. So that one is not actually part of the deadline of January 31st. So that would be a funding discussion for the school committee to consider. The other one was the use of the, not special education, the
Stabilization,
school
yeah.
stabilization reserve fund from the legacy farms, and whether or not to use that towards the design engineering for the Hopkins School. Now, there was a little reservation towards putting that towards design engineering as opposed to construction. So that is, again, something to consider. We can bring that back for more discussion at a future meeting. But that's where those other two articles that you saw previously.
Okay.
That's great.
Okay?
Thank you very much. Then are we ready to go into the district-wide study? Do we want to?
Is everybody here? I know.
You can all come up. We got extra room tonight.
Yeah, and it's shocking to us we're ahead of schedule, so yeah.
Thank you very much for coming in. Happy New Year.
The funny thing is, I was here at 6,
Oh, no.
and I wish I had come a little bit earlier, but
So for those who are at home, I know you probably are going to show the slides as well, but in our agenda packet materials was extensive information related to this presentation.
great. Chris, would you like me to begin, or did you? want to?
I was not prepared to be the presenter. I think Jeff was going to present. We were expecting him at 7:30, but I'm happy to do my best. I'm aware of all the same issues. Bear with me. So as you know, the system-wide study was commissioned by the school committee, selecting Perkins Eastman to study the capacity of the existing schools and what would need to be done to deal with the ongoing enrollment question. As it relates to our discussion tonight, it's also the kickoff of the discussion of grade configuration and how that grade configuration factors in to the options that we have as it relates to changes that would occur to the overall school. Bob and Dan have developed a number of things after working with multiple elements of the school district administration, as well as the principals and others within the school, to really understand where the needs are. And as we've presented previously, they've looked at both programming and options that are available with the existing buildings. So Dan's going to walk you through a lot of the work that he's done today to just give you a general overview of the findings of that study.
Great, thanks, Chris. And I'm happy to take questions along the way. I would tend to move right through the content and circle back, but if something's not clear, by all means, please let me know. The scope or the contents of the study includes the purpose, scope, and process, just a little bit of an overview, the projected enrollment, which you've all seen, but also a capacity kind of check on each one of the existing buildings. That also, I think you may have seen in progress. And then what you haven't seen is the evolution of all the projected needs at each school. So we've taken a path to a solution. By no means is it the only path or the only version of additions that could be applied to each school. But our charge was really to come up with a solution, and I think it's up to the school committee if there are different pathways or alternative configurations to explore those as a committee. We also, of course, put all of these additions to a timeline, which then allows us to also put a cost to it because costs increase over time. So we'll share those probable costs with you. And there's a wonderful voluminous appendix, and I'll just show you the content that's in there, just so you're aware of it. But for anybody that wants to go into detail, there are breadcrumbs left through many of the documents that let you know how decisions were made, for example, on spaces for each school. So we were last here, we did present what the overview of the purpose and the scope and the process was. I don't need to reiterate all of it, I'm happy to, but in broad terms, this is really a statement of needs, and as I had suggested, a potential pathway, a viable pathway. It's informed by meetings with educational leadership, with finance, with facilities, with principals' input iteratively, as we've learned a little bit more about the not only the space needs, but as we started to calculate ourselves what those needs were to kind of reflect back on those needs. As you may know, we've also looked at tangential issues with each school, whether it's number of toilet facilities or the location of them, as well as restricted corridor and circulation. It doesn't mean that we're able to solve all those. That was not the main charge of the study, but where opportunities arose, we tried to solve problems along the way.
And just one to add to that, this was not an in-depth facility study. We didn't look at end-of-life equipment or things of that nature. We made estimates based on what we knew about the scope of the buildings, so that the cost estimates we're looking at are really focused on the renovations that would be necessary to adapt it for the enlarged capacity, and not all the work that would need to bring these buildings up to the current level of what we expect for the Elmwood School.
Yeah, and so as Chris describes, it's really a programmatic or space needs evaluation, but when we got to the component of costs, we did apply an understanding and estimate of some of those needs that are more technical, even though we don't dive into the technical details in each school. Same with the sites. We don't have soils and updated wetlands and other conditions that engineers would employ as it becomes, each one of these schools might become a real project. But we took the information at hand, visual observations, and again, we applied cost allowances to to those things that we didn't have detail on.
And Bob, could I just, an important distinction is this is independent of, informed by, but independent of the elementary school building project. So I think that's an important distinction because I think sometimes when folks see you, they're thinking ESBC too, right? So this is something that because of the project, we're looking at the whole campus. But this is independent of the project, just informed by it.
I'd phrase that a slightly different way.
All right, please.
We're looking at this because of the enrollment.
Right.
We know that enrollment is increasing and it necessitates looking at what the capacity of all the schools will be.
Okay.
What those changes to the schools that would be proposed are changes, whether you're looking at a 2-3 Elmwood or a 2-3-4 Elmwood.
So they inform each other.
And
basically.
that's why it made sense for the school committee to select Perkins Eastman to do this as a companion piece to the Elmwood project, because they were already well entrenched in the understanding of that project and how it relates to the overall district.
Yeah.
I like that phrasing that you use. I think that it is enrollment driven. Because we actually were talking about this before we got to the ESBC2, and it was back in 2018-19, I think, when we were like, we need a game plan, a vision. We need to figure out how we can get to 2032 and educate kids somewhere.
Great, so let's get to it. The enrollment and configurations that you've seen are charted here. What this is based on is the MSBA's projections, 10-year average going out to 2032. The top bar chart shows your current configuration with your current enrollments, and the bottom two show the projected enrollments in the current configuration as well as in the alternative configuration, which is based on an Elmwood grade 2, 3, 4. With this, you can see overall the enrollments are increasing about 22.2%. That's the estimate. But within each school, you can see a variation of those enrollment increases from 18 to 25%. This was a diagram that we presented previously as well. And what this is just an examination of your existing schools and a look at capacity. And capacity is tricky because it isn't just a black and white binary number. It's very fluid. It depends on many things, as simple as your class sizes. There's the ideal, but then there's the exceptions, and then there's a point where it would be considered too much. So within that, there's flexibility. There's also flexibility within programming. We know when we talk about capacity, there are special need spaces that aren't capacity generating, but they have needs. And there's probably kind of a range as well of acceptable sizes and rooms and spaces for special needs versus ideal or maybe constrained. We know with related arts, as another example, preferably they all have their own space, including wellness classrooms. In a pinch, some of those related arts can be on a cart or can visit or travel to classrooms. So capacity isn't just one number. What we did here is look at each one of your schools, and we looked at the number of spaces built, classroom spaces built. We put the ideal class size that's based on the desire for 15 students at pre-K, which are based on the student and instructor ratios. 18 at kindergarten, which is pretty standard. That's also a standard with the state. 20 for the elementary school grades, and 22 for the elementary school grades, and then 23 for grades above elementary. 23 is what the MSBA standard is, and I think we've seen many districts that commit to a smaller class size, particularly at the elementary school grade, so the 20 is something that I would say we see quite often. Using those class sizes, we then can calculate what the general capacity is of each one of the schools. We also assume a certain amount of special needs based on what we've seen in the existing schools. So we see that the Marathon School, as planned, which means the addition that's underway right now, is included in what we're forecasting for the capacity. It also includes at the other schools the modulars that have been added to the existing buildings. We can see at the Marathon School the planned enrollment would be around 662. The current enrollment is 661. So it's close. We can see that in the elementary schools, The as-built at Elmwood is 650, the current is 626. It seems that as you go up the grades, it looks like currently there's a little bit more elbow room. What this tells us is that the additions, the modulars, the work that you've been doing to date have been keeping pace with enrollment increases. But we do see in the 10-year projections kind of a wave of large enrollment increases that these small additions won't be able to keep pace with. And obviously that's part of the reason why we're here.
So this was a question I held back on Monday that I'm curious about today. When we say capacity, you're just looking at classrooms, right? So the cafeterias, the shared spaces, are they still capable of handling capacity, right? Because if the modulars are added, we didn't modify the cafeteria to fit those extra 8 classrooms or 4 classrooms or whatever it is that we added to the modulars, right?
Yeah, so we did look at the related arts. We know how often the related arts is scheduled, so when you reach a certain number of classrooms, you trigger a second related arts room. So that is factored in. The cafeteria spaces, I know there was some flexibility with the number of lunch seatings as well. I might have to go into the details to understand that, but if we saw a fatal flaw, like an absolute deficiency in a related arts space need, it would have shown up here.
Okay.
Sorry, I think it's in the appendix of the link, is where the color-coded charts are, right? So the cafeteria might be red. If the current school with the additions that we put in, or the modulars, increased classroom capacity but didn't address that, it should show in the appendix, right?
Yeah, there's what we call stoplight plans. So they're based on just space by space, how the size compares to the MSBA standards or guidelines. It doesn't mean you can't be less than the guidelines, but the guidelines are based on standards and norms that the state sees. So that's a good point too, and I'll go on a tangent to say some of this is a little bit of an art rather than a science. So where a media center might technically be undersized, that's where we relied on the iterative meetings and guidance from educational leadership and facilities to say, is it acceptable to keep the library at this size, or does it need to increase? In almost all cases, when we get deeper into the study, we learned that the deficiencies around kitchens and cafeterias needed to be addressed, especially kitchens. So that's factored in. But.
And it gets into a broader consideration that you have to take into account, and that is that this district knows all too well that there are things that you can do that are unfavorable, but will fit more kids in a building. And so that's larger class sizes, more lunch seatings, all of those things that are band-aids that you can put on the problem, but it creates less than ideal scenarios. And so a lot of the analysis that Bob has done has been to look at what's the largest capacity that we can get to before you get into a lot of those unfavorable things. Because you could have 40 kids in a class, but nobody wants that. But it makes it larger.
Well, the reason I mean, you're going to get to this later, and I don't want to get ahead of you. But, you know, if we're having 4 different lunch periods, right, and the kids are starting lunch almost the moment they walk in the door, the space is not handling the kids, right? Like, yes, it's a Band-Aid, but it's also, I guess in my head, that means the capacity isn't right. So it can't handle those kids. We're putting those Band-Aids on. It really isn't built for it. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah.
Does the MSBA look at hallway passing space?
No.
It just does.
No, they really, but they do apply a 1.5 net to gross multiplier, which is considered generous. Schools can be done more efficiently, so within the design, there should be able to be adequate hallway corridor clearances and spaces.
During passing time, some of our schools, I do think, get a little bit tight, trying to get all the kids. I don't know if you guys have observed trying to go into, say, the middle school when they're passing between classes and trying to get across.
Yeah. Parent nights at the high school, right?
In parent nights at the high school.
We had Tim on the front lines gauging some of the traffic for us.
I'm the height of the middle school, that's why it worked out for me.
I'll go into the needs at each school. I'll try not to dwell in too much detail, but I'm happy to get into more. First is this overall matrix. It's a lot of information, but what it does, the gray rows represent your current configuration. The beige or yellow rows represent the alternative configuration, which would be the Elmwood 234, which then creates a Hopkins 5-6 and a middle school 7-8. We looked at the existing enrollment, the projected enrollment, the existing gross square footage and the projected gross square footage, and then looked at the delta. Now, when we were here the first time showing progress, these were just guesstimate square foot numbers. We now have very more accurate plans, and so these have been updated with the version or the iteration of additions that we're showing later in this presentation. Probably what's most important in this diagram is really just the projected classroom or related arts or other areas that need to increase. So to one of the earlier questions, this is where we can see, with the projected enrollment, you need a certain number of classrooms, yes, but you also need to, in some cases, have more small group or special education offices or special education classrooms. We calculated what the related arts schedules are, so we know if you needed an additional health classroom or art classroom or more gym space. And we looked at the size of libraries, cafeterias, all those spaces, and we determined where there might be 1,000 square feet that needed to be added or so. You can see in the right-hand column as well, we did factor in, I think the threshold is 3 lunches all the way through the elementary school grades, and then at the middle school and high school, it jumps to 4 lunches. So that is what's built into the projections and the way they were interpreted into space needs.
Can I just ask one,
Sure.
maybe you're going to get to this, but as I was looking at the recommendations, I didn't see anything related to staff space, like staff bathrooms or, and I didn't, did I miss it? Or is it not part of?
Somewhat. We didn't sensationalize it a bit, but it is in the appendix. We had a separate series of studies for each school that look at the circulation and the toilet room needs, the fixture count needs. We didn't, so when we show additions, we also built in, where there was a significant new addition, we built in additional toilet rooms.
For staff or students? Yeah, I saw
Both.
those and I wasn't sure if
Both,
it was.
yeah.
Okay.
We didn't, the plans aren't so granular that we've got everything laid out, but there's an allowance effectively into the plans for that.
That's a really good point. And staff break rooms and things like that.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about the staff break rooms and the size of them based on the extra number of teachers
Right.
and things like that.
Yeah, and from the MSBA standpoint, staff planning rooms vary greatly at the elementary level to the high school level. And the reason is, at least from the state point of view, there's ownership of classrooms through the elementary grades, and even in the middle school grades with team model. So there isn't much of an allowance for teacher planning rooms above and beyond that. There is space. So we look to the MSBA guidelines for some of that. At the high school level, where the state looks at it as scheduling independently and up to an 85% utilization in rooms, the idea is teachers do need more planning space, and so those things were factored in. But we did defer to the MSBA guidelines as our first course of action, overrode those when we knew Hopkinton had more specific needs, whether it's class size or something specific like family resource spaces, and then again through the iterative conversations made a judgment call on some of the spaces. That's where in the appendix, if you dive deep into the space summaries, which is a lot of matrix, in the margins you'll see little notes that talk about, that basically abbreviate how the decision was made, whether it was based on guidelines, existing conditions, keeping them, or some other criteria. So to interpret what we just saw as a room count into graphic or square foot needs, this is a more refined look at each school. The top row represents all 5 schools with the additions placed on them and the gross square foot totals for each. The bottom row, which doesn't repeat Marathon, but Marathon would be potentially the same, is the Elmwood grade 2, 3, 4. So some of the differences here, you can see there are additions capable at all schools in the existing configuration. When we go to a grade 2, 3, 4 school, I think we may have mentioned this last time we were here, there isn't the ability to renovate the existing Elmwood to accomplish that. It would be upward of 4 or 5 stories to do that because of some of the site constraints. So that's why you're seeing a new footprint effectively for that solution. We also, in the course of travels, looked at the Marathon, not only for just additions onto the existing building, but the concept of maybe removing the pre-K as a standalone facility, or maybe utilizing vacated space in the Elmwood School if it was available. We started down that path and we realized there's really too many variables here to complete that, so we think you'll see it in the appendix. We'll have diagrams and plans for that, but it seems that more analysis would really need to be done to understand what it might be as a renovation or a standalone, and we would even recommend maybe going back into some enrollment projections at those early grades to make sure that you're really building forward for those classrooms. From here, we basically look at it more in aggregate. If we know the Elmwood School project is currently underway, it's an MSBA funded project, what's left after the Elmwood project? And you can see in the grade 2-3 configuration for Elmwood, there's 108,000 gross square feet needed across the other 4 buildings. If Elmwood is a grade 2-4, no surprise, you're building more with state reimbursement, and you're left with about 2/3 of that 68,000 square feet in additions. The big difference here you can see is really the middle school, because in this configuration, the middle school drops down to a grade 7-8. Space becomes available that also connects, I'll go into the detail in a little bit, but connects to the high school and becomes part of the solution there as well. So for a look at each one of the schools, the Marathon School, we looked at the locations where we would need to add on to the existing building. In all cases, or in most cases, we see that an additional gymnasium station is needed, and you can't put that just anywhere. It really needs to be contiguous with the existing gym for supervision and just other reasons. It's a difficult location here. You can see we believe we can fit an additional 3,000 square feet and do some roadway, diverted roadway work. When we do that, we displace some parking, but there's also additional parking spaces that would be needed, so we've estimated what those are and have a symbol over here of the additional site work that would need to be done. For the majority of classrooms that are being added, or to replicate those inside that have been reclaimed, we have an addition that's pretty much central to the existing 2 classroom wings. Our first inclination was to add on to the west to the existing building, but we not only divert the roadway there, but we quickly get into some stormwater retention and potential wetlands, which seems like it wouldn't be, it would be more problematic than kind of building central and diverting the roadway in the back. So that's a look at the overall site plan. If we go inside, we've muted out the rooms because we didn't want to fixate on the exact rooms or placement. These are really quantifying all the spaces and putting them into a shape to understand the size. But you can see a 2-story, 12-room addition in the center, and then the gymnasium. Some nuances here. We've needed to expand the kitchen. We tried not to add a small addition whenever possible because it's very expensive to do a very small addition. So we expanded internally where currently the staff lunchroom is. Turns out that's not a loved room, so that gives the opportunity to build the new lunchroom as part of the new construction, but most importantly, it gives us the relief to increase the kitchen internally. There's a suggestion here to also increase the cafeteria internally. I think it may have been part of the original design to include some of that space just outside the caf as square footage in the caf. For the Hopkins, it turns out for a grade 4-5 or a 5-6, it's pretty much the same. They started out being different, but the enrollment projections are only one student different for one school or the other. So in this case, we looked at a number of places to add on to the existing school, and of course we encountered more stormwater retention or wetlands. So this location seemed to be the best for consolidated construction. When we add on to the existing building here, we're taking away some of the hard surface play, and we're elongating the building. We're using that as a benefit to try to resolve some of the circulation issues that exist there. This, we would suggest a reconfiguration to increase parking in front of the school, but then dedicate the front of the school entirely to, I actually don't want to get too much into the traffic because this is just a, kind of a thought. It's not fully vetted, but this would allow the car drop off to increase, which would help relieve some of the congestion that's on site, and buses would continue in the back. The addition here presumes that we would relocate the Elmwood the newer Elmwood modular units. They were designed to be able to be relocated and even match aesthetically, I believe, the Hopkins School. So that's what you can see here, shaded slightly different. If we look inside, we can see, again, we needed to expand the gymnasium. The only adjacent space that's really usable to expand would be the current cafeteria. So that allows us to expand the gym internally and then build a new cafeteria. It turns out this school is woefully undersized when it comes to some of the mechanical support and custodial space, not something that we're looking to add on, but it is extremely deficient. So the kitchen looks like a good place or space available to utilize since we're relocating the cafeteria. So the addition you see, the large new addition includes a cafeteria, stage, art, music, and 8 classrooms.
So conceptually, would the old cafeteria near the kitchen then be repurposed for classrooms, or?
The old caf. Oh, the old caf becomes the third gymnasium station that's required.
Okay.
And then we also know that there was a challenge in the school with some of the interior windowless space. We can't avoid using it, but we are able to take, in this case, STEM rooms. There are 2 STE rooms that are part of the program for this grade level, part of the state standards. So that becomes the perfect location for shared pull-out science, technology, engineering space in the middle. On the upper floor, the middle is carved up to be classrooms. Some of them would have an overlook into the media center. And should this become a real project, I think more work can be done to try to find even better suited program for the interior windowless space. But we kind of ran out of options on this study.
Probably a silly question, but I feel like I need to know the answer. Is there a different scaling of furniture, sinks, whatever, between a 4-5 and a 5-6? Like, does a 6th grader fit comfortably in the space that's typically designed, or for a 4-5?
Yeah, there are a number of different thresholds, and there are some ranges. For example, within the plumbing code and the accessibility code. So and I can't recite offhand exactly where those thresholds are, but there's some common ground that you can find between some of the younger grades. But yeah, there are definitely different heights and sizes.
Yeah, in the plumbing code and the AAB, 4, 5, 6 is grouped together.
Perfect. That's perfect. Thank you.
In this case too, we also tried to ultimately reuse the smaller modulars that are classrooms right now for other support and smaller spaces. So whenever we could, we tried to right size the rooms.
Those are the modulars you mean that are currently at
The
Hopkins?
current modulars, yeah, I think they're about 675 square feet each space. So over to the middle school, we can see here, just at the bottom of the screen, you can see the high school. As a grade 6-8, the new addition requirements here are shown, located in the courtyard area, and limited a little bit in its size in the courtyard because we didn't want to go so far that we cut off the circulation around the back of the school. So we also looked at adding between the middle school and high school. It's a little bit of an awkward shape, but it's really just a single loaded set of classrooms in a corridor that connects to both the middle school and the high school if desired. And that allows us to kind of complete the program needs for the middle school. We know that in this option, there would be probably a different permitting process. To cut off the circulation between the schools is not necessarily a problem, but it's something that we would want to review with fire and safety. And we're basically creating a new footprint of these co-joined buildings that still would have full perimeter access, but it creates kind of the interesting space between the two, where there's where there is access, but it's not something that continues all the way through. This also has the replicated parking. I think we understand that there may be a plan afoot or some thought given to adding some parking where the tennis courts exist now. So to look inside at the plan, we see a 2-story 12-room addition that for the middle school between the middle and the high school, and then a 2-story 6 science room addition. The science rooms were something we targeted to build new because the space standards are much greater than what exists at the current high school. So the existing high school science labs were appropriately repurposed for art and tech spaces. They're about the right size for that, so that was a good kind of trade-off. Inside the school as well, a couple of interesting things. We needed to expand the kitchen. There's virtually no way to expand it on the outside of the building because you're right up against the roadway along the side of the middle school. So what we needed to do was take over one of the existing engineering rooms, expand the kitchen into that space, and then allow the cafeteria to expand into the former kitchen. So a lot of work on the inside, but really necessary to utilize that cafeteria space. One of the things that we also looked at here, this is where the middle school, probably pinch point corridor, was the worst of all the schools that we've seen. So we're suggesting that the corridor get widened about 4 feet. We know that there's structure within that 4 feet, so there are a few things that can be done. It could be eliminating lockers on both sides, maybe nesting lockers where there are columns so that as students are standing at their lockers, they're really within the zone that has the columns. I'm getting into too much detail, but whoever you hire to do this can look at this. The idea would be that you really create much wider, at least 4 foot wider circulation to navigate that zone. If the middle school were 7-8, so if we had the 2-3-4 Elmwood and the 5-6 Hopkins and the 7-8 here, there's one less grade, but we are suggesting a small addition to increase the science labs. And in doing so, you would also vacate a number of classrooms that are in a remote portion of the middle school adjacent to the high school, so it becomes kind of a companion solution for both the middle and high school. So this shows expanding science labs where most of them exist, really reconfiguring them. And then in the red dotted line, we're showing the vacated space. So the idea would be to take the lower level really off from the middle school needs. And also just above that lower level, there's a handful of classrooms that are also not needed for the middle school program. That would then allow, you can see in the light shade, and I'll get to it next, the high school needs become an addition in this direction, and it would connect to that space. So.
Okay, I was going to ask, it would be nice to connect no matter what, but it's from the high school end this time.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so moving right on to the high school, if the middle school were 7-8 and the high school was trying to address its 9 through 12 needs, you could do it with this small addition between the two because you're utilizing the existing middle school space. And I know it wasn't part of our charge to look at what could be a 9th grade academy, but the number of spaces exist in this shared middle school new addition zone so that it seems like it would be more than adequate for that type of a zoning of space. So just a look at the high school with these additional rooms. It's interesting to make this connection. We actually have to break through where currently the dark room is to make a reasonable access and navigate over to the middle school. This shows the additional spaces. Internally, there's a number of other things that are happening here in the high school. I think as the high school program needs increase, some of the increases also in science and technology spaces, in art spaces, and some of them are already in place and of a certain size. So in this plan, we've expanded some of those rooms, like the scene shop, like an additional art room, or the TV studio, some engineering space. And so as spaces have expanded internally, they become part of what's replicated replicated in new construction if we took away something to expand them. So there's some internal expansion happening that also turns into new construction. I'm not saying that the best way I could, but I think you understand. And then if the high school were, the middle school were a 6-8, and so the high school is just adding on purely for its needs, not utilizing the middle school. This is another variation to build an additional wing in the front of the school. It seems like a great location. It comes with a number of challenges. There is a drop-off in grade there that can be used to advantage, but it would require a bit more excavating to make sure we have daylight to 3 floors of an addition there. It also lands on wetland, and wetland can be replicated within reasonable amounts, I think a 5,000 square foot threshold. But there's drainage issues, stormwater issues, so this also would be part of maybe, would go through a more robust permitting process as part of determining the solution, but viable. In what we've seen in our experience, something that can be done. And this is just pretty much a straight 3-story addition with classrooms, technology, science spaces, toilet rooms included, on each floor. So I can pause here, or I can go right into the timeline and the cost.
I just have 1 or 2 questions. With the middle school 7 to 8, I noticed the cafeteria still needs to be expanded, and the kitchen. Is that right? So no matter what, we would be out of capacity?
I'm sorry, the middle school.
7 to 8. So down there at the bottom right?
Yes, it does need to be expanded.
So even for 2 grades?
Even with 1 less grade, right.
Okay. So we are operating way above capacity right now.
Yeah,
Okay.
and the formulas sometimes for a kitchen aren't completely scaled with size. They're scaled a little bit, but there's a minimum size, and then there's a certain square footage added for students above, whatever the number is, however many hundred students. So, but I think in this case it was about 500 square feet but of great need from what we've heard and what we've seen.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else want to ask a question before we move into the next?
And I can come back as well.
Just if there were a executive summary page on the front, my takeaway in a single sentence, I guess, would be that none of our buildings is adequate to support the enrollment that is projected right now.
That's
So we knew that. We sort of knew that, but it's I guess good and bad to see it proven out, just so that we, this is part of the plan, is that as we make decisions soon about Elmwood and so forth, knowing that there is a roadmap that is achievable. And this is what this is helping with. But doing nothing at any of the schools. You didn't come across a school and say, oh, middle school will be fine, or high school will be fine.
Definitely not.
Right.
Just wanted to confirm.
Yeah, the charge of the team in this study was to assess your existing infrastructure and what can it hand with the current enrollment today and with the projections. And with the upper grades, those students are already in your pipeline. They're already at the lower level, so there's a lot more certainty with that. Obviously, at the earliest grades, at the marathon school, those are more projections. Those children aren't born yet today in many cases. But with the students you have today, it's a sustained wave. And there is a need in all the buildings in town.
So as far as the timeline goes, we took a step back and we looked at the projected enrollments that we're utilizing, and we looked at them on a year-by-year basis. We filtered them to kind of gather a snapshot of each school and how they project out for each school. And then we applied capacity thresholds to them. And this is where it gets interesting. So what you're seeing in green are the enrollments. And the years go, they're fiscal years, so they start from 2023 and they extend down to 2032. So at the top, 2023, you're seeing the schools in green, and that means that they have adequate space to meet the enrollments, the projected enrollments, these for the number of rooms that you have and the ideal class size, or within this green, it says that you may add 1 or 2 students per room. So that was considered within a tolerable threshold that doesn't suggest you're beyond capacity. But if your ideal is 20 students per elementary school, it might mean you have 21 or 22 in each room. To get beyond that green, you're in the yellow, and that says you have 1 or 2 students extra per room, and you're needing to do more. So maybe 3 students per room, or 1 or 2 students per room, and you're repurposing some of the health and related art spaces to create more classrooms. And that carries you a certain distance or number of years, and then when you're in the red, it's suggesting that you have 2 or more students per room. You've repurposed spaces to get more classrooms, something that you have done in recent years, and you need to do something more. So you need to do the combination of even 3 or 4 students more per room and repurposing space. But this is where we would say the red is where we'd say this is where you need to be building space.
Just to clarify, these reds exist if we don't do the modifications and additions that we talked about a few minutes ago.
This is based on your existing schools with your modulars and with, for Marathon, the construction underway right now.
So hopefully, if we were able to put these projects in play, we would not have red on that soon.
The next slide shows you, if you, at least with the Elmwood project for a grade 2-3, you can see when that's completed, it's immediately in the green. Nothing else has changed. For the Elmwood 2-3-4 project, it grabs 1 more grade, the 4th grade, so you can see it's all in the green, but now the middle school has also got capacity, generally. But you still have the other schools in yellow and red.
And someone might look at this and say, well, Hopkins and Marathon are in red first. Why are we doing Elmwood? And Elmwood, just as a reminder, is an end-of-life replacement, whereas these are capacity modifications.
And Elmwood comes with the MSBA reimbursement.
For that reason,
Yeah.
because it's an end-of-life replacement.
So to see these overall, we have 2 timeline scenarios that I'll let Jeff and team go through, but the first is for the grade 2-3 Elmwood, which would be 4-5 Hopkins and 6-8 middle school, your current configuration, and the other one is if it were a 2-4 Elmwood with 5-6 Hopkins and 7-8 middle school.
Thanks, Bob. So on these next 2 slides, the Marathon and Hopkins are consistent from slide to slide, so just want to set that tone. as you saw from Bob's presentation, there's a need at the Hopkins today, no matter which of the two grades actually are housed there. And so that's probably your earliest need. We've overlaid the red from Bob's previous two slides on here just to kind of graphically show where that hits in the overall timeline. So there is an ability to run the Hopkins project in parallel with Elmwood and stay in front of the red wave that's coming behind you. The other variations on the middle school, high school are dictated by the solution for the Elmwood project itself. And so on the first slide here, it focuses on a 2-3. I'll note that I took the more conservative approach with the overall schedule being a general contractor delivery. The tiny font here shows kind of end of completion project. In the case of Elmwood, it's October. There are many decisions in front of the building committee, the school building committee, that can influence whether we go a construction manager or a general contractor. We can adjust these to hit the natural break point of either a winter break or the summer break. So, but I didn't want you to be alarmed about the October turnover. With the larger Elmwood school, it's a December winter break turnover. And again, there's the ability to adjust those. But we're looking at this from a conceptual standpoint, so a high-level view. The middle school, high school, if the solution for Elmwood is the 2-3, as you saw on Bob's slide, there needs to be a solution at both schools. And so on this slide, we've broken them apart. But we've kept the feasibility the same, and so the darker purple there is a study that we would recommend that you would go through and determine how those two buildings can function as a campus, if that is the ultimate solution, or should they be broken apart as standalone buildings as they exist today. We've tried to align this with your natural town meeting points in terms of when we would recommend the release of the design funds and construction funds. We could certainly dovetail that and time it more precisely if there was an appetite for a special town meeting for some of these. But from a zoom out standpoint, that's some of the underlying factors there as these two schedules lay out. In the case of the Hopkins, it shows that it'd be an ad reno, as you saw in the slides from Bob, and essentially could be completed in the summer of 26. The exception being that the modulars that could be relocated from Elmwood would not be available at that point because the project at Elmwood would not be done at that point. So you could have most of the work done by that summer of 2026 for the start of the school year. The middle school, high school, in this case, we staggered. One of the beautiful things about the 2-4 solution is it builds in your decompression space at the middle school and allows for swing space. So whether it's the larger renovation or the smaller renovation at the middle school, high school, it will go faster with the larger Elmwood because you've decompressed that space and you can more efficiently have a contractor move through the building and renovate the remaining space. And you also start with a plethora of swing space. On the next slide, it shows that if the larger school was built at Elmwood, it shows that December turnover of 2027 to 26 to 27, and that the middle school, high school is a combined solution. And as you see, we're able to complete that much earlier in 2028 instead of 2029, as was shown on the other slide. So there's a benefit in multiple ways, more than just the decompression that Bob showed. To the larger Elmwood, it actually plays into the speed at which you can get some of the other projects online. And do we want to go to cost first, or
sure.
Do we want to pause on schedule and go to cost? Or?
So one of the confusing things about the schedule that hit me on Tuesday is the boxes change. So like for the 2-3, Marathon is in a completely different place, Hopkins is in a different place. So it's kind of hard to follow into the next slide, right? The colors stay reasonably the same, but the order.
The order, yeah, like the middle school, high school collapse in on it, and then there's 5 rows versus 4, so yeah, it does get, the scale of the image gets changed. You're correct.
Well, I'm talking just the order of the schools, right? So this one has Elmwood, then Hopkins, then middle school, then high school, and the other one has Hopkins as the second.
The Elmwood and Hopkins are the same on both slides, and then the middle school, high school gets split up, and in both slides the Marathon is last. I laid it out in the potential recommended solution path. Okay. Now you could pick these projects in any order that is palatable to the town. Okay. And so Marathon could go earlier. In this case I showed it to go later, as Bob had suggested earlier. You know, because those future students aren't born yet, you know, you want to refresh the data for the Marathon school and make sure that you are addressing the right size for that one. We have much more certainty with the other grades that are already in the pipeline and alive today.
And from a formatting standpoint, they occur in different order because it's showing the flow of one project into the next, which changes whether you're 2-3 or 2-4 in the approach that we took. A caveat to how this is oriented is that this is based on a logical path from project to project to try and minimize how much effect you have of that red wave at the end. So trying to complete the project before that red wave really hits you hard. And that was sort of one of the driving factors of putting marathon at the end, is because it's projection. And one of the driving factors with putting, say, Hopkins second is because you know that you're going to hit that a lot sooner than a lot of the others, and it would need to run parallel to Elmwood. So as we move into cost, these configurations are also what informed the cost that we developed.
Okay.
So obviously it's a town decision when you want to approach these projects, but for the purposes of generating costs for this study, this is the framework that we use to inform that cost.
Your point's well taken. So we can reformat this, because the audience is not just this table, it's the viewing public at home, right?
That
And
was
so
kind of my point. Like
it needs to be boiled down for the quick flip back. And so
Yeah.
we can scale that so that it's the same number of rows, and then just have, middle school addressed above, reference, so that the scale is the same.
Yeah, okay.
No, it's a great point. We're in the weeds too much sometimes, so.
I do data visualization for presentations a lot, so it's like.
It is
like
nice when you can
this.
flip back and forth. It really,
Yeah.
it crystallizes.
Just, I think this is true, but based on the kinds of expansions, some of the internal kitchen expansions and so forth, is it your feeling that we can continue to use the schools while these renovations, we don't need another satellite school to move kids out of Hopkins, or we can occupy while renovating?
That was the idea.
That's the working hypothesis, yes. Like with the major renovation projects being the middle school, high school, or Hopkins, we would need to further evaluate the individual chess piece moves. But yes, holistically, we would not need to relocate all the students to a satellite. We would also focus on what we call summer slammers. So, the new addition is the easy part. We can add that as an appendage around the building. The renovations is the more uncomfortable part, where we're actually getting into space. With some of the older buildings like the middle school, high school, and Hopkins, we could trigger full code upgrades. So, full sprinklers, change in handrail heights, change in door swings. And so you really start to touch lots of individual spaces for the good. They're things that should be done, but you're forced to do them once you get to a certain threshold value of the dollar in relation to the value of the building and the asset.
Thank you.
And that's also a point that kind of carries on to cost as well. That, we've earmarked this cost in terms of a conceptual standpoint based on the high level information that we know today. We have not done a code thorough analysis to really measure every last door handle height to know which ones would need to be updated. So they are relative conceptual costs. We've layered them out in terms of when they happen that matches that schedule. Should the committee in the town choose to take them in any other order, we would need to adjust the escalation out. Those of us that are paying at the pump and have lived through the last couple of years, we know that the last 2 years were extremely painful in terms of dollars and escalation. Most years average around 4 to 5%. Since the pandemic, it throttled back to 1% for that first year of the pandemic, and then throttled way forward to 12% for the past 2 years. So that's a dramatic shift in terms of where we projected previous dollars to today's dollars. That's partly why you see even the new construction at Elmwood drastically different than what the town paid for Marathon only a few years ago. Those are real dollars and real bids that are coming in. We take the other 3 projects here, 3 to 4 projects, and try and project them out based on the timeline. We know with more cost certainty what happens in year 1 in 2023 than beyond. And I think, Dan, we projected 7%, I think, for this.
Projected 7% for 2023, and then 4% for 2024, and then 3, kind of going back to normal.
Right.
At about 3% after that. So this is like a bell almost. There's a curve up, and then it goes back down, and it level. Hopefully, it levels back out. That's everyone's hope.
Optimism.
It's not just mine. Everybody's in the industry.
And so, these are order of magnitude prices, and they're large numbers. Make no mistake about it. The conceptual numbers here are 327 million for the 2-3 option. The 2-4 option under this scenario is 321 million, so it's 6 million less than the overall, but you're also getting back significantly more money from the state for the reimbursement of that extra grade. So conceptually, the delta between these two options is a $15 million savings to the town with the larger Elmwood option, everything being equal with the presentation, the details provided.
So as we go forward, I know we're talking about the engineering study and such for Hopkins. I think one of the things I would appreciate knowing in terms of code upgrades, even if they're not required, what sorts of ADA type upgrades could be done to the building that would be beneficial to students, as opposed to like the minimal code upgrades, right? I think that would be good, because I think it, depending on the cost delta, it might be good to kind of swallow a little bit of that cost and get ADA upgrades that would help the students.
And one of the things that you will see now that we've taken this district-wide study this far is I will start to work to take these costs and re-look at that 10-year plan based on using these timelines, these projected costs, and re-look at what that looks like, and that can be presented back to you when it's ready.
That's great. Thank you.
And that's pretty much what we have. The appendix exists, and as far as the content, we included a page on assumptions and limitations of the study. We included the bit of work that we did on a separate pre-K facility, or what it might utilize within the Elmwood school if made available. And then we walked through each one of the schools, and we see detailed space summaries, the existing program plans, the assessment of that program, and the plumbing and circulation. Happy to take more questions.
Want to start down there? Questions?
No, I thank you. I think this is maybe like the third time that I've seen, and you guys have done so much work on our behalf here to get this together, and I think the town has been asking for us to, for a long time, asking for us to try to get ahead of the curve with student growth. So this is a really awesome summary of, here, if you want that, here's what it's going to take. And it's hard to see $300 million and be like, sure, we should totally do that. But it's good to know that the thought is going into it, and how we tackle it as a community is going to be sort of the next step, I guess. But to be able to do this by this time frame. So thank you guys. I don't have any questions. I think I've parsed them all out in the ESBC tube in here, but yeah, thank you.
I love to see the whole thought process laid out. So not just the costs, but the clear justification for the costs, which I think everyone in the town is always looking for. I agree with Jen. We've been asked to project for a long time. The money looks intimidating. But, at the same time, part of the reason we have the home prices we have, part of the reason why, we have people moving into the town so much, part of the reason we have such new growth is because of our schools, right? So this helps us to kind of make the case that if we want to keep the schools doing as well as they're doing, then this is the investment we might need to make. Right, so thank you. I really appreciate it.
100% agree with them. I think it's amazing work you've done, further in many ways than I expected, which is really helpful. I think the details help us really understand, where we could make choices. Like knowing what your assumptions were, we can sort of work with that much better than if you hadn't been so thorough. So I'm really appreciative of the thoroughness. I'm always I would rather know how big the beast is. I think we know we have kids, they have to eat lunch. They have, we have reality of growth, and we have to address it. And I think this is a great tool for us and for Susan to, start to use, to lay it out, and we can use this to communicate with our town partners as well. So I don't have any other questions. I think it's great. I have a lot more, I've read it and I've read the appendix, but there's a lot here. There are a lot of schematics. It's good to keep looking.
Echo what everybody else has said. I would kind of add on top of what Leah had said, that looking at these pieces, are not just a matter of the excellence of our schools, but the safety. I would say when you look at numbers like 1,876 students in our high school, that doesn't seem in its current configuration that there's any way that could be safe. Just adding that many more students and if we don't do something. So appreciate all the thought and plans that have gone into this. It is a staggering number, I think. I think probably somewhere out there, our town partners are probably, the jaws are potentially dropping. But I do think it's good to be able to have these upfront potential costs to look at and to be able to make decisions going forward with all of this information. So, thank you. Holly, do you have anything any questions you'd like to add or ask?
I don't have any questions. Can you hear me real time? Is this happening real time?
Yes, we can hear you real time.
It's amazing. Yeah, I don't have any questions. This presentation is incredibly thorough and so easy to follow, and I appreciate all the work that was done in it. It's obviously something that's going to take a much bigger discussion to fully wade through, but I'm very appreciative of having all this information. So thank you.
Thank you. Anything else from your end?
Can I add one more thing? I think it's important that they called out amazingly well in that last slide, is that if we do the 2-3-4 configuration, which and there's definitely some pluses and minuses, the amount of money that we'll get back from the state, the fact that building a bigger school and making all those adjustments is actually going to be $15 million cheaper is, I think, a really important thing too. And the numbers are big for sure, but they are what they are, and to save $15 million on something that we just need to do at some point, whether it's this year or over the course of the next however many years, having that as a cost savings in the long run is only good. Yeah.
It is. And speaking of that, I'm just going to use this as a plug for the timeline for our grade configuration decision. We are going to vote on February 2nd on grade configuration, so that we'll know which path we're headed down as the ESBC looks to plan the building. And then next week we will invite people in who want to talk with us about that. So thank you very much. Appreciate you coming out.
Thank you.
Yes, and one more forum on the 24th of January.
That's right, one more forum on the 24th. And there's a staff-only forum as well on the 11th.
There's also another one on the 12th, daytime.
At
the senior center. We're trying to reach both daytime and evening.
Yeah.
So yeah, we have a daytime 10 a.m. at the senior center on the 12th.
On the 12th, yeah.
Open to all.
That is
And I
great.
highly encourage seeing the new configurations and the way they're starting to lay out. It's really cool.
And we'll be back with you next week to answer any questions that come up as a result of the public forum that you're holding.
Oh, great.
Thank
Too
you
bad
very much.
Hopkinton doesn't have a hotel for you guys.
I know.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night. That brings us then into the FY24 budget recommendation, and that is you, Dr. Kavanaugh. I know there probably is a momentary switch of the wire switch to get your budget recommendation up for people to see. I do. I'll take this minute then just to do another plug for our public hearing on the budget, which will take place next week, where we will invite members of the public in to have a conversation with us about the entire FY24 budget. So.
It should be on that screen in just a moment, because I think that's
No, it just occurred to me that one of the questions I didn't ask is, they're using the 10-year projections and saying it'll be green in 10 years, but what'll happen 3 years past that, right? Because we're trying to create capacity so that we don't have to keep building. So in 13 years, will that capacity still be at a good level?
Bring that back for next week.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, and I think, they did touch on that a little bit in terms of what you have is in the system and moving through as a wave. But what we don't know is that true projection for the marathon, because those students have not been born yet.
Right.
So it is where we have to keep going back and refreshing the data. And as we refresh the data, it will take us beyond the 32. So it'll get to that 11th, 12th, 13th year, and we'll start to get a picture of that. So as we continue to do that, which we should anyway, we'll be able to still adjust, because at each funding May, as you see, we start with an OPM, so we haven't gotten to true design until even the second one.
Okay.
And so each time we go out further, we'll have projections
Better
that go
idea.
out further.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so here we go. Another presentation of the FY24 budget. You will see some changes in tonight's presentation. I want to thank all of the service providers who came and met with Dr. Zaleski, with Mrs. Kavanaugh, and me. We did get to sit with every single one of them. And over the last couple of months, and I don't say this in a way that is dismissive, there have been an awful lot of very high emotions and a whole lot of data collected and a whole lot of work and a whole lot of investment. And I think that we've listened very carefully. And so I think tonight when you see some of the changes, it will offer you some rationale for those changes. And I feel like we're in a better place with the budget. So as we started the budget process this year, and as we always do, we approach the FY24 budget stressing fiscal responsibility. So we do that when we meet with all of the building principals, with all of the directors. We have conversations with them about, what is the budget message from the community, from the town side, what are their needs, and to really think hard about what it is that they need to have and not necessarily what is nice to have. We always want to maintain Hopkinton's exceptional educational and extracurricular programs, and I think we succeed in doing that. It's important to us to offer curriculum and instruction that meets the needs of all of our learners, and those needs are academic, they're behavioral, they're mental health, special education, social emotional, all of the needs of our kids, and the work is multifaceted. We clearly need to accommodate enrollment growth, and I think the previous presentation really speaks to that. And of course, we need to support the building principals' school improvement plans. So when we built the FY24 budget, as you're taking a look at it, you can see the Dr. Wagman, he was our own demographer, those are his projections. And what he projected for 23-24, and typically we look at this as where will we be at the end of the school year. His projection was that we would be at 4,160 students. And so today, we are at 4,184. That was the last count that Georgette did for us around noontime today. So the good news is we are only 24 students above that projection. And you know that in previous years, we have been way above that projection. So what we're seeing with some of those MSBA demographers' numbers and Dr. Wagman's numbers is that they are kind of coming to fruition, which is, it's comforting.
Can I ask, when it says FY24 was built for 4160, is that actually supposed to be FY23?
No, that's FY24.
Next year's
Yeah.
budget was built for.
When we did this budget, we did it predicated on the 4,160 kids.
One question.
But I know what you're saying. What we're looking at is 23, 24, not, right.
Well, and what are we going to be at in September of 23 for a budget being, that we have built right
Yes,
now at
that's right.
4160? Are we going to be looking at post-budget ads potentially for?
Well, the thing to keep in mind, so at this time, we're at 4184. The projection for 23 was 4,078. So we are above what our projection was for this year. However, in the next fiscal year, your 12th grade graduates, your incoming K comes in. So the numbers you can't just build on top of where we are today, because you will have those ins and outs. You have a 12th grade projection at 325 that will leave, and a 12th grade projection for 24 at 273.
Okay.
So you start to see a little relief, but these are the numbers where we are building a budget based on these projections, but we're always running ahead of the projection that the budget for this current year was based on for the end of the year.
Yes. And we really have had years where we've been 200 students over. I mean, it was.
Yeah.
So you can take over the operating budget.
Okay. So moving into the operating budget, the FY24 salary increase is $3,118. The expense increase is not 3,000, 3 million. Apologize. Problem solved. 3,118,000. Expense increase 1,558,000. For the salary increase, that represents a 5.6% increase, and the expense a 2.8% increase, for a total increase of 8.4%, which is $60,199,487 as a net number.
So just to clarify, our town partners gave us a 5.9% target, right?
5.1.
5.1. And just the salary increases already kick us over that,
Yes.
no matter what else we do.
Yes.
That's right.
And the salary increase, that includes new positions as well?
It does, and you'll see that further clarified in a couple slides. Yeah. And just as a reminder, we use revolving accounts to also decrease the amount that we're asking of the general fund for the budget. So the number you saw previously is net. So we use parking, building use, the bus, preschool, athletics, international tuition, and circuit breaker. So you can see our use for the revolving funds for the FY24 budget increased $498,000, and that is wholly due to the increase in circuit breaker. You remember in the previous year we needed to ask for, or the strategy was to establish the special education reserve because of the increase in out-of-district placements, tuitions, and circuit breaker is a reimbursement 1 year later.
Yeah.
So that increase in circuit breaker is what we are seeing this year based on the increase from last year.
And normally, the fact that the circuit breaker doubled would have given us quite a bit of relief, right?
That's correct. So again, you'll see further what is also an impact on our expenses this year. Currently, there is a 14% increase in out-of-district tuitions for private schools. That has been approved, so that is within the operating budget right now. We are carrying that. Had we been at a typical increase for tuitions, which is around 3% average over the last 10, 20 years, this increase in circuit breaker, we would have actually had a decrease. But that is not the case.
Do you know, just as a point of reference, which comes out first, the 14% increase request from the out-of-district schools, or the information that the circuit breaker is going to be doubled? Do you know? You may not know the answer to that question. I'm just wondering.
Clarify that again?
So, which do we find out about first? Do we find out that the circuit breaker will be doubled for this year?
Yes. Yes. So we file in June based on our actual out-of-district costs, and then in the fall the state tells us what our circuit breaker reimbursement will be.
Right.
Because again, that reimbursement percentage is also part of the state budget.
Right.
So
From-
how
from the
much
previous year.
circuit breaker is allocated for everybody as part of the state budget.
Right.
The 14% increase was approved late in the fall after circuit breaker. But again, so this will be an increase in cost for fiscal year '24, for which circuit breaker would not reimburse until
Until next
fiscal
year.
year '25.
Right.
So,
Right. Okay. I understand. Thank you.
Yeah, and the 14% is everywhere, because I talked to a friend in Uxbridge.
Could you
who's in
see
the
where my
school
head was
committee,
going? Yeah.
And they had the 14%
All right.
increase as well, so that,
Okay.
Yeah, it's affecting every school district.
Right. I was just worried they were taking advantage of the state's increased generosity this year, but
There is something to be said about ESSER funding and the way private schools were allowed to use funding.
all right. And I know that's a separate conversation, sorry, but as you were speaking, that started to
Of
occur to
which
me.
we do not have control.
Right,
However,
right. But it's an
districts are very loud at the state level.
Okay,
So
good.
they're very aware of the constraints they're placing on communities for allowing that 14%.
Okay,
yeah, I was
thank
gonna
you.
say, I mean, in the past 2 years, we've had a lot of opportunities where we've seen how pushback at the state can change certain things, right? And during the COVID era, so, are we also part of the loud
Yes.
districts?
Yes,
Thank you.
Okay. Good. Good to know.
Can I just make a comment on the special education reserve fund? And just, my understanding is that the town is likely going to fund it at a comparable to what we're looking for. It's going to be
This is
Funded
part,
it.
this is part of our budget request that is going forward.
My concern is that when we created the Special Education Reserve Fund, my hope was that we would be able to have more money in the Special Education Reserve Fund than we were using, so that next year, for example, if we had unforeseen costs, we would know that we would be able to cover them without having to have big bills in our budget. Where, because this is coming out of the Special Ed Reserve Fund, it's not allowing us to build it into the base of our budget, so that we then are having, it's not counted in what would have been next year's, whatever the select board's message is. It's
Yeah,
gonna
we're
be
not
above
Right,
that.
and
We're not
again,
building it up.
that
Right.
14% increase is what is really hamstringing
Yeah.
having that,
Yes.
having that reserve fund to be actually a reserve. We're not there yet.
Okay.
But the hope is that we will get there.
It would have been the hope this year.
I just want to express that's my hope for,
Yes.
for the future.
Agreed. So if you move on, again, the number that was presented a couple slides ago was the net, and that would be the general fund request. So when you add in the revolving offsets and the special education reserve, the gross operating budget for the Hopkinton Public Schools is $63,990,000.
What percentage does that equal out to? Does it push us over 9?
I didn't do that.
Okay, all right. We don't need to do that math right now. It's okay. It's over 8. Let's just go with that.
Yes. So again, just always trying to give somewhat of a visual of where we are spending the total operating budget. 79% is spent on regular education and student services. That leaves 7% to keep the building and facilities operating, 4.3% for technology and infrastructure, and 3.9% for transportation.
Can I ask a question, since I've been pushing the technology angle a little bit lately? The regular education piece also includes like technology that is part of the education program, right? So the technology piece over there that we're talking about is sort of infrastructure technology.
That's all technology.
Right, like the laptop leases and everything
Yep.
is all in their technology.
Software,
Okay.
yeah.
So if we use a virtual textbook or virtual subscription of some sort, it's categorized under the technology line.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that much looks tiny to me. Okay, thank you.
And one last slide that we always talk about is the fact that as a service industry, 80% of your operating budget is people, is salary. So moving into salaries, again, the contractual obligations for FY24 is $1,831,000. Staff requests represent $1,286,000. And we like to separate these out into buckets. Again, the top bucket would be contractual, the $1,831,000. Special education is $611,000, which represents 9.4 FTE requests. 4.6 FTEs of that request are in place and are grant funded in this year. Instructional cost and enrollment growth is $492,000, which is 7.85 FTEs. Instructional program enhancements, $119,000, which represents 1 FTE. And support at $63,000, which is 1.4 FTE. And again, 0.4 of that request is funded by grant this year, for a total salary increase of $3,118,000.
Can I just comment on the grant funding, because someone had asked me, one of the reasons why we have grant funded positions is because we have a need in a year that we've already budgeted. We're in the budget year. We don't have extra budget for the need, so we utilize any funds we can get to fill the need, and then there's typically a time limit. You can't continue to sustain a position on grants. Like,
Correct.
you have to roll it in. So I just want to clarify that, because it's not always clear how the grants work, and the fact that we do have to transition off a grant. We can't.
Yes.
We can start it. We can get positions filled during the year, which is great because we've had a lot of need. But then once they're filled, we can't sustain it on a grant.
That's correct.
Are there some grants, though, that would allow for certain positions, like maybe a Title I grant or something like that, that would allow an existing grant-funded position to be grant-funded in, FY24?
Yes, so we use Title I funding for tutors, and we'll continue. So we're using them this year, and those positions are still within the grant for next year. So you don't see them transitioning out of the grant. There are some rules in terms of how much of a grant you can use for different types of positions.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is the rationale where you do need to transition somebody out of a grant.
And some of these positions we pay for with like COVID-based grants, right?
That's
In the
correct,
past couple
ESSER.
years, so those are drying up anyways.
That's
so.
correct.
And I think we were a district that was cautious with our ESSER money.
Yes.
There were lots of districts that funded a lot of positions, and then you knew that you either had to absorb them in your operating budget or eliminate those positions. And so we were very careful not to do that.
Okay, so drilling down into each of these, again, student services, special education, 9.4 FTEs. That represents 1.4 FTE teaching, 3.9 FTE paraprofessionals, 3.0 FTE director of curriculum and instruction, 0.1 for nursing, 0.6 social worker, 0.8 admin assistant with a 0.4 related service reduction. Instructional cost enrollment growth, 7.85 FTEs. Marathon is 2.3. Hopkins at 3.35. Middle school at 1 and high school at 1.2 FTE all teaching. Instructional program enhancements 1.0. So middle school 1.0 and high school 1.0 media specialist with a middle school 1.0 library para reduction. Admin support and facility enhancements, middle school a 1.0 10-month guidance admin assistant, high school 1.0 12-month guidance admin assistant, high school 1.0 10-month guidance admin assistant reduction, facilities 1.0 custodian, technology 1.0 website manager reduction.
All right, so I want to talk a little bit about what used to be 2.1 FTE reductions across speech, OT, and PT, and how those positions have been modified. So we will start with speech and language, and originally we had recommended a 0.5 FTE reduction, and we are completely eliminating that reduction from the budget. So we are leaving the full complement of SLPs intact. That's the plan. So one of the conversations that I've had with Dr. Zaleski and the building principals is that, we really have to start to explore now what those FTEs look like, and workloads and caseloads and service delivery models and all of that. So we're going to start working on that. And we are going to start working on that so that when we are in the FY25 budget process, we have a much better picture of where we are than what we have today. So one of the plans is that our building principals, the new directors, the team chairs, and Dr. Zaleski, they'll start to work with our SLP providers to think about how we're scheduling students. And some of that work, as I said, will begin immediately. And if there's an excess of FTEs for the number of students who require speech and language services, rather than thinking about making those reductions, what we would like to do with that is, and I know that this is sort of beyond school committee purview, how personnel are deployed, but I think it's important for the conversation of this budget. So the plan is to sort of redeploy SLPs if there are excess FTEs. And so when you do that, you can offer literacy instruction and interventions in the general education classroom. So while it would be great to have an SLP go into a classroom and work with the students who are on their caseload, we're envisioning something even larger than that. So if you go into a classroom and you push in and you're working with some of your students who are on your caseload, we're certain that in those classrooms there will be other students who may or may not be on an IEP, may or may not be reading at grade level. And so if a student is on an IEP for reading reasons and a student is reading below grade level, this is an opportunity for us to have our SLPs go in there and offer instruction, and this would be at Marathon and Elmwood pretty exclusively. There's a huge emphasis on phonics and phonemic awareness when you think about K and 1, and that really is in an SLP's wheelhouse. And I think sometimes our K1 teachers are obviously they're exceptional at teaching phonics and phonemic awareness to kids. But that kind of background that an SLP has, and things like, when we were having our meetings, we were sort of joking about fricatives. And when you talk about fricatives, it's those sounds that you make when you, blow air out. Like an F or a V is a fricative. So you go f or v. And your mouth is doing the exact same thing, but with an F it's unvoiced, and with a V it's voiced. So if you're teaching kids, especially even with sight words, right? So a kid learning sight words, sometimes you have a TH and it's voiced in a word like this, and sometimes you have a TH in a word where it's not voiced, like thin. So how is it that our kids are wrapping their heads around phonics? SLPs would be phenomenal at that kind of work. When we think about ways that you could use them as you move up the elementary scale, so to speak, we do an awful lot of work with our kids at Elmwood, for example, on comprehension strategies. So what about like the WH questions, who, what, why, when, using visualization strategies, using retelling strategies, all of those things feed into comprehension. And really they can work on story elements. So when we have kids at Elmwood who are doing things like who's the protagonist, who's the antagonist, what's the setting, what's the plot, this is a place where I think SLPs could be super helpful. I'm excited about this, and I'm really excited about it because we keep looking at reading scores across our district, and any additional support we can get in our elementary classrooms for reading would be amazingly helpful. I have reached out to Mrs. Abate to see if there would be a time next week when Dr. Zaleski and I would be able to sit with her and some of the SLPs to talk about this kind of work.
So can I kind of rephrase the whole
Sure.
thing?
Yeah.
So you have a hypothesis, right, that with rescheduling and with the new directors and with a thought process around how you set everything up, that there will probably be this extra time after all of our SPED students, all the special education stuff is covered. And so this is just a plan to make use of that extra time if it's available, so that we
Correct.
can help more students.
That is right, yes.
Okay.
Can I ask a follow-up
Sure.
clarification on that? So that would mean, in listening to it that way, that it's not a set number of percentage of FTEs, but it's based on what the needs are and how much time might be available with the SLP, so that it sounds like flexible?
Oh, it has to be flexible,
Okay.
sure.
And that the IEP needs would be met first?
Oh,
And
absolutely,
then
by law, they
this-
have to be.
This seems like tier one, the ability to, tier one, tier two stuff in the classroom, in addition, if there is the.
Yes, a lot of what
ability.
we're talking about here really is tier one instruction. It's just to augment that.
One more
Sure.
thing. But so if the availability of speech and language pathologists exists in somebody who's in one building and not the other, but would they be able to move between buildings, or how would that be determined?
So when we looked at the SLP schedules, when we look at Hopkins, for example, I think that the provider there has a full schedule. You look at the middle school, that person has a very full schedule. And when you look at the high school person, because the high school has a 7-drop-2 rotating schedule, there's really no way to take that person and redeploy. So that's why we're really looking at Marathon and Elmwood kind of exclusively. And yes, I would imagine that you could go between the two buildings, but you know, you don't want to set up something that feels impossible.
No, okay,
Yeah.
that answers my question, thank you.
All right, so our physical therapists, we had originally recommended a 0.8 FTE reduction, and again, we're going to eliminate that reduction, leaving the full complement of PTs intact. The worry, I think, at this point is that you've got 1.8 people, but they're going across 5 buildings. And so we don't really know much about, at this point in time, about what that service delivery model looks like. You know, we talked a lot about caseload, we talked about workload, but we didn't talk a lot about service delivery model. So what we'd like to do is just bring in a consultant to think hard about what do our PT, caseload, workload, service delivery models look like, and are there any, I think, better service delivery models than what we have in place right now. And I'll talk about that a little bit related to the OTs as well. So with the OTs, although we had originally recommended a 0.8 FT reduction, we're proceeding with a 0.4. And, you know, we had a really nice conversation, I thought, the other day, Mrs. Kavanaugh and I, with the HTA president and vice president, and we really had lots of conversation about this very topic. The HTA has said that while it's possible that some minor scheduling adjustments and staffing allocations could be made, you know, the proposed cuts, and that was referring to the 2.1 FTEs, we're really taking a hacksaw to student services rather than a scalpel, and I think that we have really done that. I think Yeoman's work to get to a place where we think, what does it look like with a scalpel? So that's why we're taking this more cautionary route with OT. We did think very hard about what does workload look like with occupational therapists, and some information was shared with us about, you know, what is workload, how is it defined? And if we define, or we use the AOTA workload definition, they define it as all of the work activities that an OT performs that benefit students indirectly and directly. So as a district, how we've defined that really for our people is to say that, you know, we are expecting direct OT services provided to kids. We know they need preparation time. We know they need consultation time. We know that they are providing RTI, and that is obviously temporary and changeable. RTI doesn't go forever, but, you know, new cases come, old cases go. They must attend IEP meetings and other meetings. They do screening and evaluation, and then they write reports. So for us, that's what we mean when we say workload. And then we also talked about caseloads, and someone had shared this data, and it's kind of an interesting, it came out of an article. The article tells us that 541 practitioners across the United States were surveyed about this. Interestingly, you can see over here on the left-hand column, I'm not sure how well you can actually see that, but if you look at 31 to 40, that's clearly on the low end of the scale. And we have 3 providers who are in the 31 to 40 category. And we have no one in 41 to 50, which is sort of the average. And then we have a person who's at 54, which is on, you know, much higher end of it. But you can see too that those numbers go down. But the number of people who are servicing 100 students clearly goes way down. In fact, it's only like 1% of the population across the country. So it feels nice in Hopkinton to be in this segment right here. It feels like we are in a good caseload place. And we know that caseload data, while it tells a story, it will never tell the whole story, because people could have someone with 5 times 30, people could have a student with 1 times 30. But here's the part where we haven't, in our opinion, done quite enough work, and that's service delivery model. And we are eager to start to do that work. These examples on the left-hand side are examples that come from the American Journal of Occupational Therapy. And so when they talk about service delivery models, there's an integrated push-in model where direct intervention happens in the typical school environment. So it might happen in the classroom, it might happen on the playground, it might happen in the gymnasium. We don't use that particular model much. We primarily use a non-integrated pull-out model, which means that direct intervention happens in a therapy room or another designated space away from the student's peers. There are co-teaching models where direct intervention with the occupational therapist puts that person in a place where they're working together with another professional. Could be a classroom teacher, could be another professional. Consultation or collaboration in direct intervention where the occupational therapist acts on behalf of a student. Block scheduling, blocks of times are allotted for specific or direct interventions. We don't use that model. And a 3-to-1 model where 3 weeks out of the month a traditional intervention is provided and 1 week a month services are provided indirectly. So these are all things that I think we need to be considering, and the American Journal of Occupational Therapy has an article entitled Caseloads and Workloads, which is pretty informative. And what they say in that article is that the academic focus of No Child Left Behind and IDEA requires that supports be provided in the child's natural environment. Interventions are most effective when provided where performance occurs, and we can say that the Hopkinton Public Schools predominantly uses a pull-out model, which is somewhat outdated. So this is good work for us to be doing going forward. And it's our belief that when you do that kind of work, it will also augment kids' social, emotional, behavioral goals, should they have them. So that's the recommendation around there. The reduction has gone from 2.1 FTEs to 0.4 FTEs, and that is solely in OT. So I will let Mrs. Rothermick continue with the last part of the budget presentation.
So moving in away from salary and into expenses, again, the expense increase is $1,558,000. When we look at that visually, 30.4% represents student services, which is contractually or legally required. 18.4 is to keep the buildings open and operational. 19.7 is for transportation. 13.5 keeps all the tech running in the buildings and student-teacher devices, which then leaves very little what could be considered discretionary expenses. So looking at that expense increase in those same buckets, contractual, inflation, and current services, the increase is $719,000, which is around transportation, utilities, regular education, athletics, and technology. For student services, the increase is $669,000, which is transportation and out-of-district tuition. Instructional cost, enrollment growth, and replacement cycles at $190,000, which is transportation and technology. And the last one, facility enhancements, is a reduction of $20,000. To drill down in the contractual, inflation, and current services, transportation, this is a contract, new contract estimate. We are out to bid currently. Our utilities, we have new electric and gas rates, and this has already been reduced by the offset of the estimated solar savings for the rooftop installations of $102,000. For athletics, this is a transportation estimate and the pool rental, which is a new cost because we lost the use of the Keefe Tech pool. And miscellaneous others, regular education and technology.
So is the thought that the roof solar panels will be in place by August, or like what is the projection that is giving you this number?
So they have been installed on both the Hopkins roof and the middle school roof currently.
Oh, okay.
I believe they've also done the high school rooftop install, but there's many other steps. You still have to get the wiring and electrical and all that set up. So the hope is that these would be commissioned by July 1. The hope is that they'd be commissioned sometime in spring, but that's what we're planning for. We are not planning for the parking lot offsets to be part of the budget.
So when I hear you say you're hoping potentially for the spring, but planning for July 1, does that mean there's the potential to assist our FY23
Yes.
budget with that?
Yes.
Nice news.
But we're always,
Cross my fingers for it.
we're always waiting on Eversource. That's usually the last piece to the puzzle that takes the longest. They
Yeah.
have to do that interconnect meter.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that because I know that during COVID they suspended the timeline. So usually Eversource has a certain amount of time to respond after the placement of the solar panels. And during COVID they had suspended that, and it was taking them like 6 months sometimes to get back.
It takes Eversource 6 months anyway.
So I was just wondering if they put those timelines back in place. because-
At this time, there is not any indication that we won't hit our timelines.
Okay.
Okay, moving into student services, the increase, 615,000 is transportation, 49,000 is tuitions, and again, that very big highlight of that 14% rate increase. Miscellaneous other increases, and again, this was offset with the use of 1.1 million in circuit breaker. Instructional cost enrollment growth represents transportation and additional bus at 81,000 and technology leases at 109. And the facility enhancements is a reduction in our extraordinary maintenance of 20,000.
What projections are we using for the, is it the transportation revolving fund where parents pay for the buses? What projections are we using? Are we projecting based on last year or?
We're projecting based on revenue received. But again, last year,
Was so odd.
we
That's what I-
doubled our use because we had kind of put our revolving use in a parking lot, if you will, during COVID. So we are spending at the same level that we proposed last year, but it is double the receivable.
Okay.
So we'll still be okay for '24. We're basically working down the balances, and at some point we will have to reduce that use.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay.
I have a question, but not for today, because I didn't think of it until right now, but I know that we changed the threshold on people being able to access reduced fees for things like buses. At some point, it would be nice to look at the comparison if that's going to impact any budget things going forward.
Right. So as we put together both the salary and expenses into those same buckets, you can see the contractual inflation and current services increase is 2.5 million. Special education increase is 1,281,000, again with 9.4 FTE requests. Instructional cost and enrollment growth, 682,000 with 7.85 FTE requests. Instructional program enhancements, 119,000, 1.0 FTE requests, administrative support, facility enhancements at 42,000, which is a 1.4 FTE request. Again, the total increase request is 4,677,000.
One final question. Last year, when we were trying to deal with the very tight budget that we were forced to deal with last year, I know that during this time, there was this projected money that we might get back from the state, but we didn't know when the budget of the state was going to go through and when we were actually going to get the money. Is that the case again this year? So there's a possible amount of offset for the budget that we don't know about yet, but it's probably coming March, April or something.
Do you mean the Chapter 70 money that we
Yeah.
get as regular
Yeah.
education? So typically what happens in a normal budget year, we would know by the end of January what the first round, the governor's proposed budget would be. Because we have a change and it's a new governor, they're given time to propose their first budget. So we won't hear that first iteration of budget until March.
Okay.
So it'll even be longer than it was last year.
The Chapter 70 money goes through the town, not directly to us, is that?
It goes to the town, that's correct. So if you watch the CFO, Tim O'Leary's presentations, he always talks about sources and uses, and the sources include the funding, the projection from the state for Chapter 70.
Okay.
And we're on the use side. And the last slide is just taking those same requests and buckets and putting them into those percentages. So you can see contractual inflation in current services represents a 4.6% increase, special education 2.3%, instructional cost and enrollment growth 1.2%, program enhancements 0.2%, and the support at 0.1%. And again, the total request increase is for an 8.4%. And again, it would be for the budget request and the special education reserve that would move forward.
Thank you for all this work. I mean, I know, wow, every year I'm just amazed because we start like September, October, and everyone inside of the school district, like the principals and everyone gets involved in this process, and then you come up with this huge, giant, comprehensive package, and thank you. It's a lot of work that went into that, and I really appreciate it. I think I also appreciate the changes in the cuts and the sort of reasoned kind of scientific hypothetical approach that you're taking where you're going to gather data. I think that's probably the fairest way to do things, especially with the new directors, right? Mm-hmm. Because when you have more people able to directly listen to their employees, you get more feedback, you get more understanding of the situation, and you can adapt better, right? So, as I said before, Dr. Zaleski has so many people under her that I can't imagine if she tried to spend 5 minutes with everyone under her, I'm sure it would take up her whole 40 hours, right? Like, there's no space for her to be able to probably do the things that she really wants to do, take a lot of time to listen to. So the directors, I'm hoping, will give us that coverage, and then they'll give us more information as well about what's on the ground and what's happening and how the changes are affecting everything. So I think that's a reasoned, thoughtful approach to this. So yeah, that's all my comments.
Other questions?
We asked him on, well, I asked him on the way. We asked him on the
Yeah,
way.
we asked a lot on the way.
Yes.
We did jump in. Holly, I know that you're there remotely. Do you have any questions
I don't have a question as much as maybe everybody knows what I'm going to say, but I do continue to object to the cut in the special ed department. I mean, I know we've made some progress from where we started. There was a big move as far as total percentage, but I'm a data person, and I don't think I've had a clear data set that kind of addresses the divergence between what we have seen from the administration versus what we have seen kind of as rebuttal from the HTA and CPAC. And I found it really interesting, both HTA and CPAC analyses kind of are coming to the same conclusion, even though both of these analyses were completed at different times with access to different data sets. And so I've kind of asked it, a more integrated presentation of the data, or at least some sort of like, let's figure out what we're missing in between what the administration is measuring, what the administration is using to make this cut versus, kind of a universal call from our stakeholders to not make these cuts. And how are we ensuring that the folks that are receiving the services or providing the services are fully understanding where the administration is coming from, and that the administration knows where, the rest of our stakeholders are coming from. I did get to have some conversations, and the kind of like when I would ask specifically, what is causing this big gap, it was kind of seemed more personnel related to me in nature, and it was kind of beyond the scope of what a school committee member can adjudicate. And I think we haven't really seen workload data. I know that was kind of alluded to tonight. I think there's something, and perhaps I'm alone in this, but I am missing something. Like the gap is large, and I know it's not a fiscal consideration because we're talking about a 0.067% of the total budget. So this is not a tax consideration, or like we're worried about going even more over what the select board asked us to do. So I was really hoping for like clear, concise data that we can all kind of say, oh yes, this makes perfect sense. I personally haven't seen that. I think that, for me, listening to kind of 100% of our stakeholder feedback and testimony, kind of saying, this is not what we need, this is not what we want, and this is not what is right. So my concern with the cuts remains our rapid population growth, the increasing needs among our whole student population, and the need for educational equity for all the students in our district. They've been this cut, or in all cuts, were universally objected to, and I did note that it is the only real cut in the budget. The other reductions in staff were kind of like contract changes. Yeah, that's what I'll say. Thank you.
Okay. I did have a question. I don't want to pivot awkwardly off of that, but I know that we have some grant funding that we expect to have coming in, the IDEA grants and whatnot. Are there positions that we know that we would like to fund through some of those grants next year? I know you had mentioned, now I'm confusing earlier in the meeting, that the literacy tutors or the tutors in general can be funded by the Title I grants. Are there other positions or is that other positions that you have in mind that might receive, or grant funding might go towards, or are those something that we hold in reserve for further into the process after we've approved what we're being able to get from the town and the state?
We'll leave our current literacy and math tutors in place, obviously, so if they are grant funded, they'll stay intact. But historically, we've kind of kept that money in a bucket in the case that, a need arose, a good example is, let's imagine that you've got 3 or 4 moves-ins at Hopkins, and these are kids who have real math needs, and we have one math tutor, and we say, oh gosh, we could use some more math support. Like, that might be a thing that we would do with that money.
Do we, and forgive me for not remembering this, but do we have tutors at all of our schools, or which schools have the tutors? I know the middle school has some tutors. What other?
I don't think the high school.
Not the high school.
What about the elementary schools?
Mhm. Yes, they definitely do.
Yeah, I believe it's Elmwood, Hopkins,
Okay.
and the middle school.
I apologize, that came up in my head as we were having a
Are you
discussion.
referring just to title-funded tutors?
I
or-
am, well, I suppose both. I mean,
So for instance,
the
we
impact
have,
is the same.
we don't have a title-funded, like a Title I funded literacy or math tutor at one of the schools, but we might have a concentration in other areas. Whereas we might fund, for instance, we fund a ESOL tutor through a different title grant. So they might come from different spots.
Is the ESOL grant one that's able to be continued, or is it one like some of the others where you have to pick it up after?
It's one that's fairly predictable. It follows a pretty similar. I talk like I've been doing this for more than 3 seconds, but what I've come to learn is it's pretty predictable. And the big thing, I know the conversation was about grant funding. The big headline that I have learned through my work, coming to understand and wrap my arms around, these federally funded title grants, is the big difference between supplementing versus supplanting. So we can't, I can't say I want to take this money and pay for this position that was in our operating budget last year.
Okay.
But if it was covered, if it was not covered, if it was a new position, it can now be funded through a grant. Now, the second we absorb that into operating, there's no backsies.
Right.
So next year you can't say, I want to fund that through the grant. Oh no, you found a way to do it with your operating, so find a new way to spend that money.
Like our math support person at Marathon has been there for a very, very long time, and that salary's in the operating budget, so there's no way that we could say next year, let's fund that out of Title I.
Right.
But so theoretically, if these director positions came in and they identified needs that were related to just hypothetically reading at a particular level, they could potentially move forward sometime between when they start and when we're able to get grant funding to bring in some other positions that they identify as being needed.
I'm not sure I know what you're
Okay,
asking.
okay, so
Say
I'm
that
saying
differently.
that, the director positions that have been proposed in this, and I know that the preschool and the K-5 curriculum directors were able to start on grant funding this year. If in their capacity, say even just between now and July 1 or August or whatever, they identify a need, and it could be anything hypothetically, but I'm going to say, just because we talk about literacy and reading, it was a reading need. Could they then look, if it's a new position, to get funding for that would potentially be in next year's, not operating budget, but next year's what we have available for support for our students?
Yes, so you're saying if between now and July 1, you said, gosh, we need somebody to support reading.
Right.
Could you use Title I to do that? Yes.
Yep, or even if they started, in September and they identified what's coming in with next year's whatever grade class, gosh, these kids maybe aren't quite ready for what we hoped for at, second grade or fourth grade or whatever the new level is. I have asked a lot of questions. Do other people have anything before we are coming back to this next week, and again on the 19th, next week is our public hearing, and certainly we have the opportunity to kind of absorb what we've heard, absorb other things that we want to consider before we come back to it next week.
Go ahead. Go ahead. First, I just want to say thank you for the work and the iterative work, and thank you to the parents and the providers who met with you and Dr. Zaleski. I mean, it's a whole ecosystem of people who have been putting their focus on getting this right So I really appreciate that, and I know that we have all been doing a lot of reading and thinking and learning as well. So thank you for that. It's a lot of work. And so I think in general, the budget looks good. I appreciate the changes that were brought forward today. I think what I said the first time you've been on the budget, with a bit more cuts, philosophically, you know, I do like to not go up and down a lot, you know, as fiscally, I wouldn't want to be, you know, hiring, you know, so
Sure.
I like consistency. So I appreciate that the approach is conservative. I also like the idea of getting the director positions in place to, as Leah said, be, you know, a closer set of, you know, eyes and ears across the system to really understand what's happening and just be closer to really assess if there are gaps or needs, or, you know, we've heard both, you know, we really need more of X, or we have excess time in Y. Like, you know, and I think having directors in the positions to do some of that Karen, Dr. Zaleski just can't possibly, as one human being, you know, be at that level of detail all the time. So I think that I'm a supporter of those positions as well. I need to think, you know, this is the first time we're seeing the cut, so I want to think a little bit more about the .4 OT. Like, I don't know. I have a lot of faith in all the due diligence that's been done, and you and Dr. Zaleski have been sort of overseeing this department to great success for, you know, a long time. So I'm sure that it's a good cut. I just worry with the enrollment growth is still where I am. So, but in general, I think the budget looks as good as, you know, an 8.4% increase can look. I don't know where we could cut, you know, so I really appreciate the work. I'm looking forward to the public forum as well.
I am as well. I do also want to highlight that I am aware that our some of our town partners, I know the appropriations, Mr. Manning and Mrs. Birchman are both watching us remotely for various reasons, and they may have some questions related to tonight's presentation as well. I also appreciate all the many hours that have gone in, the entire team, the many hours that we've had from the community to be able to provide feedback. This is the most engaged I can remember from all of the stakeholders, and that I think helps us all be, you know, a little bit better for all of us, and that I appreciate greatly. Also want to think about the .4 reduction a little bit more in the OT department, but thank you for, and I know that there were a lot of hours that you and probably some of the others on your team put into this over what for many of us was a break week. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I'll just say one last thing. I know we want to move on in our agenda that's getting late, but I echo what folks have said about the conversations that have taken place over the last couple of weeks. But I also think it's important, especially because we're going to hear from CPAC tonight too, that our administration team has been enormously successful at eliminating the us versus them mentality that I think used to exist in the community in general when we were talking about the school's budget, which is helpful, hopefully helpful in pushing through something that might be a little bit higher than what they wanted us to be. But I also think it's important within the school community, and I don't think this is unique to Hopkinton, I think it's universal, that the us versus them, teachers versus an administration, is a dangerous thing to have as well. And I think, I appreciate that you have taken vacation time and time to sit down and talk with the HTA and to the stakeholders to find out where this difference in data interpretation exists. And I think anyone who's ever done a modicum of academic research knows you can slant data in any direction you want. You take the right test, you can make it look like this, you can make it look like this. So I can appreciate why there's sort of a divergent thought on what is actually happening based on the numbers. But I also think it needs to be looked at as a universal sort of community of learners and not an us versus them. So I think that's, if we can do it with the town as a whole and eliminate that confrontational aspect of the budget process, I think we can do it within this smaller community, within the school community. And I think that's, thank you for taking the steps. And part of me feels like, yes, I agree, it's hard to go up and down. It's hard to consider a cut as a person. But I also think, based on the conversations that have been had, if this is what everyone came together and said, we can make this work and this makes sense, then I'm in favor of it. If there's still folks who are adamant about the way that the data is being presented, is still being interpreted in two different ways, then I think we need more time to look at it, or another week to look at it. But thank you for your efforts to try to at least make sure everyone is seeing things from as much of the same angle as is possible in this situation.
Yes, and I really do think that we have tried to listen and be curious and be cautious and approach with, data and thoughts about kids and professionals, so thank you.
And to, I think it was Amanda, to kind of echo off of that, is our district does have a very strong track record of providing for our students, for all of our learners, in continuous improvement, and that we do hear frequently that there are families who move in for our special education services, so that we are fortunate to have had such outstanding services for our students and such dedicated professionals, and appreciate your careful look over the past few weeks.
I think every year we add, I think, a significant number of special education positions, because we are always thinking about that kind of programming and our desire to see every child succeed. When we say we approach the budget with an eye toward, can every child in the district succeed, it's not lip service, we really do that.
Yeah, I mean, I said most of what I said. I echo some of the thoughts around me. I find it very commendable that when the parents started to get concerned, that instead of holding your ground or kind of standing where you were, you went back and you talked to people and you provided data, and you, like Nancy said, I mean, you worked through your vacation and interviewed tons of people, and I think it's commendable that you took the concerns, you said, I may not be in the right place, and you went back and you started the conversations again to see what might have been missed, where, the point of view that you hadn't heard might be correct. The massive amount of work that the administration does, I say it constantly. You're working 14-hour days on a regular basis, and you do it, and you walk in here with a smile on your face, and you're still willing to pivot, and you're still willing to do more hours. So thank you for being that conscientious, because I couldn't keep up the work schedule you have and be at all sane. So it is appreciated, and I wanted to say that because I know this is contentious, and I know we have differing opinions on this board, but I think even with the differing opinions, we can agree that you are putting a lot of work into this.
Yes, I think we all have, so, yeah. And Karen as well, who isn't here.
Yeah.
We'll come back to this next week. I expect we will probably receive some email and some people who want to come in to speak to it in person. With that, I would like to invite our CPAC representatives up. Welcome. Computer? Can you pull the, just because you're connected to it.
Take your time.
Sure. Oh, they love paper reports. Thank you.
Do I have
I sent it to you at like 6-ish maybe. It was before I came here. It was the final. Welcome.
Thank you.
Appreciate you guys being patient with a long meeting.
Yeah,
parents of special needs kids, nighttime routines are very important.
Yes.
And might be, going forward, maybe put us a little bit closer to 7 o'clock rather than later, if possible.
Duly noted. I think the thinking in the agenda creation was that because yours was related to the budget, that the budget presentation might inform some of what you want to respond to.
Do we advance the slides, or do we?
No, I can
She
do
can
that for you.
advance the slide.
I would like
just
to
have to
advance
overview.
my own slides, if that's okay.
Oh, there we go. Whew. Sorry. Took me a minute.
So,
I think you have to say next, right? We can't do it over here.
No, you'll have to say next slide.
Yeah.
Sorry.
all right. So, hello, everyone, and good evening. My name is Jen Halliday. I'm your CPAC liaison to the administration, and with me tonight is Dan Malone.
My name is Dan Malone. I'm a former CPAC board member and current CPAC member.
Okay, so next slide. I'm just going to, before we even get started, I'm just going to let you know that this is probably one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. I'm not a comfortable public speaker, and my face will probably get red. This is very stressful. I'll probably trip over my words, and just, if you can focus a little less on me and what's happening to my body and maybe just focus on what I'm saying and what my slides say, that would be great. And even just know that I'll answer whatever questions at the end, but maybe if we could wait until the end, just help me to get through this, okay?
Absolutely.
So CPAC is the Special Education Parent Advisory Council. CPAC is the link between the school administration and parents and caregivers of special education students in the town of Hopkinton. Next slide, please. CPAC is an advisory board, and it's mandated by law in the state of Massachusetts for every public school district to establish a CPAC. Hopkinton CPAC represents between 12 and 13% of the student population. Next slide. CPAC is a public body, and it's different from parent-teacher organizations and other public groups. The duties of the CPAC include advising the school committee on matters that pertain to the education and safety of students with disabilities, and meeting regularly with school officials to participate in the planning, development, and evaluation of the district's special education programs. Next slide. So tonight, we hope that you'll take away the following: that the approach on how to best support our most vulnerable students has left out key stakeholders. The decision to reduce therapy staff was not data-driven, and the role of therapy providers has been discounted in this process. Next slide. So parents are naturally confused. If you drive anywhere in Hopkinton, you see new construction. All we talk about here at school committee is growth over the past several years. That's why parents are having such a hard time understanding where the idea is coming from. So when all we ever hear is about exploding growth and schools not big enough to fit our students, a staff reduction is very confusing just on its face. And CPAC asked for data back beginning on November 9th, which was the morning after the announcement was made that cuts were happening. This data was only supplied after a Freedom of Information request was filed on November 28th. And also, many parents have a better appreciation of how complex it is to administer school-based therapy, since they've had to actively facilitate their own children's participation in the therapies over Zoom during COVID. And MCAS scores are showing that Hopkinton special education students are not progressing compared to other districts. So it's distressing for families to see teachers coming forward to school committee, who is essentially their boss's boss, and say they've been begging for help and it's falling on deaf ears. Next slide, please. There does not appear to be any meaningful analysis of data. What we can show you with the data provided to us by the district is that proposed staffing for OT, PT, and SLP will be the lowest it has been for 15 years.
The metric selected to measure the efficiency of therapists is not a valid measurement. Several licensed therapists who are not employees have already gone on the public record to sound the alarm. There are unanswered questions about the data used to justify these budget decisions. There is no data that supports cuts. Staffing trends do not follow current or projected growth. You're one slide too. Okay, so that's fine. Keep it there.
Okay.
Next slide. Thanks. As a result of our Freedom of Information request, we were provided with data from administration. Using 15 years of data showing how many OTs were working in the district year by year, we came up with this graphic to display the information. The green line is the staffing levels year by year. It has hovered between 3.2 full-time equivalent staff to 4 full-time equivalents. The little triangle on the graph on the far right is the proposed new level for full-time equivalents. The original triangle was lower, yes, at 3 FTEs, but the new proposed reduction is the equivalent of a therapist's job 2 days in a week. That workload will now have to be distributed among the remaining staff. While the district may like to think this is a compromise, CPAC does not feel that any cuts are acceptable. To see staffing staying flat in a district that is growing at such a rapid pace is a concern. In addition, there has not been a compelling argument in the data provided to show that a reduction will not result in decreased quality of service delivery. It is not palatable to families to know that staffing will be just about as low as it's been for the last 15 years for occupational therapy in a district that has been called the fastest growing district in the Commonwealth. Next slide. So if we zoom out and we look at all 3 therapies as a whole, physical, OT, and speech, I want to reiterate that this is data provided to us by the district. The green line here is the sum total of all the therapies and how many staff we've had over those same 15 years. The proposal on the table is the little triangle. Now keep in mind that 2 days ago that triangle was a fair bit lower, but while it might appear that the administration is making concessions and being reasonable, the data still says otherwise. It's not a feeling, it's a fact, supported by data that was supplied to us by the district. Next slide, please. So if you drag that little triangle across the screen to the left, you can see that these 2 lines do not intersect anywhere. What this is showing us is that the proposed level of staffing in a district that's growing faster than we can build classrooms, we have not had staffing levels this low for therapies in the past 15 years. Next slide. So if we want to look at trends, let's take a quick peek at the trends of all of our therapies. That same 15 years of data that again provided to us by the district, it shows that for therapies, we're trending down for 15 years. If proposed cuts are factored in here, the trend would be obviously lower, but in the interest of showing where we're at right now, we're already trending downwards. Also, if you look at this chart, keep in mind that back in 2007, there were roughly only 400 children on IEPs. Today, that number is closer to 500. So I think it's certainly, next slide please. It's certainly important to look at trends, but also at projections. So this graphic is an important contrast to the previous slide. This shows the growth of our district from 2007 to today, which is where the arrow is, and using demographer data that the district uses to project our future growth for the next 10 years. This data has been accepted by the district and is exactly the data that is used to justify large capital improvement projects, such as a new school or an addition to an existing school. The district's analysis failed to look at the past or the future, and CPAC is disappointed that the district was unable to produce a comprehensive review and history of this program before making such a bold decision to cut. We do agree that something bold needs to be done, but cutting staff is not supported by data. Again, you will see here that in 2007, there were 400 students on IEPs. Now, using these projections that have been accepted by the district and assuming at minimum that 12% of the total student population on IEPs, the accepted projection is that 700 of our children will be on IEPs by 2032. Next slide. So, same graph, I've just added a trend line so you can see the direction we're headed. We're growing. This shows we are growing, we are continuing to grow. Not that we needed a graphic to prove that, this is more just so that you can contrast it to the trend line of the previous slide. So put it on the next slide. Okay, so these are the 2 slides side by side. You can see that our population is increasing and expected to do the same for the next 10 years. and that trend in therapies is going down. The raw number of SPED students is increasing while staffing is decreasing. I wonder if this reduction in staff could be a correlation with the concerning poor performance in MCAS scores amongst our special education students. This is something that CPAC will continue to drill down into, but that's not the purpose of tonight's presentation. So it's been said time and time again, keep us on this slide, that the data supports cuts. CPAC had expected to see in the data we requested in our Freedom of Information request something that might explain the claim that we're overstaffed and that reductions are needed. We asked for more detailed data that might show like a smaller number of kids are qualifying for services or something to that effect. But we've been told that this data does not exist. The year-by-year data of how many children are using these services does not exist on a spreadsheet in the office where staffing decisions are being made for our schools. Again, I will reiterate that CPAC is an advisory board and should, when we request information, be provided it without having to submit a Freedom of Information request. Next slide, please. So my third key point is the role of therapy providers has been discounted. Next slide. Okay, so there's been a lot of reference to service delivery and the insinuation that therapists aren't doing enough of it. Next slide. Okay, so service delivery is defined as the time that the therapist is face-to-face with a child administering treatment. The top of the iceberg is all that district administration seems to see. I say this because this is the only thing that's being measured in the data presented by administration to justify reductions. Next slide. I'm an orthotist, and I've worked decades in the field of physical medicine alongside physical therapists, occupational therapists, and speech therapists. I have maybe a little better understanding than the average person of what therapists actually do. I know that service delivery is not the only responsibility in the scope of practice of a school-based therapist. If you look at the bottom of this iceberg, this is the stuff you don't see as a layperson. The job is more than service delivery. It includes loads of other things, and all of those things take time. If we're going to be sure to give exemplary services to our kids who, last I checked, were entitled to a free access to public education in the least restrictive environment, we need to at least account for some of these tasks when we're making decisions with such great consequence. So keep us on this slide. Meetings, some of the duties, meetings. There's a lot of meetings when you're a member of a team. Between team meetings, school meetings, IEP meetings, some therapists work at multiple schools. That means even more meetings. RTI, or response to intervention, which I actually had to look up. This is a timely intervention geared towards students who are not meeting the essential standards of their grade level. These kids are general education kids who might be assessed and seen for a short time to, for example, correct a speech sound. Evaluations, well, that's face-to-face with a student, but that time was also overlooked in the analysis. IEPs. If anyone has ever seen one, the typical individualized education plan is roughly 20 pages. That's another task, to write those up. It's not reflected in the data provided. There are many more. Only some are on this slide, but take it from me, it's a lot. From my years working as part of a healthcare team, I know that the main determinants of the success of rehabilitation is the ability of a team to collaborate. Collaboration is, in my professional opinion, the most important determinant to the potential for an individual to succeed. The ability of team members to get together, well, they first have to have time to get together, to problem solve. It's essential to success. A school team is no different than a healthcare team in that respect. If we're not on the same page, we're all working in different silos, and I think you can agree that's not really an efficient use of resources. If, of course, we're looking to be efficient, which I think that's what we're trying to do. So again, when administration measured the value of what therapists were bringing to the table, the only thing they measured was service delivery. They just counted the top of the iceberg. Service delivery. No consideration to the rest of the iceberg. That would be like measuring my value as a parent and only counting how many peanut butter sandwiches my kitchen generates. And I hear you at home, you're saying, oh, but the data, it was triangulated and prep time and everything else was taken into consideration when deciding we're overstaffed. We're going to show you that that is simply not true. Well, Dan is actually going to show you. Next slide.
Administration presented these two slides in their previous presentations to the school committee as a foundation for their assumption that they were overstaffed. The slide on the left added up service delivery hours and budgeted hours for OT, PT, and speech. The slide on the right compared the service delivery hours and the budgeted hours. Service delivery hours are the face-to-face time a therapist is with a student, and the budgeted hours are the total working hours of the therapist. Administration defined the difference between service delivery hours and budgeted hours as a loss to the district. Next slide. So we'll start with the slide on the left. Next slide. We have highlighted the OT hours in pink. There has been a dispute between the therapist and the administration over the accuracy of the service delivery hours. However, we won't get into that dispute for this presentation. We'll use only the data from the original slides for the administration. Next slide. The administration is using budgeted hours as the measure to determine if the staff is working efficiently. The top of the iceberg is the only thing they're measuring. Next slide. So let me show you how we've determined this. For OT, there are 3.8 FTEs in the district. Working 6.5 hours a day, 5 days a week equals 123.5 hours. This shows the budget needs to fund 123.5 hours of FTEs to pay their salaries. Next slide. The administration has a small error on this slide that shows 122.85 hours. I don't know why they have this error, but we'll assume it matches for now. Next slide. And the administration states that every second of the 123.5 hours should be applied to service delivery, i.e. face-to-face therapy with the students, which is what is shown above the water on the iceberg. Next slide. If you apply even a few of the items that are below the water on the iceberg, such as lunch and prep time, the amount of time left for direct service delivery becomes dramatically reduced to only 96 hours. Next slide. This results in a 26-hour error from the time that they would be able to deliver direct services. Next slide. We can show the same is true for PT and speech as well. For 1.8 FTEs working 6.5 hours a day and 5 days a week is 58.5 hours. Next slide. You can see how this matches on this slide with the administration's budgeted hours. Next slide. Again, adding a few activities such as lunch and prep time reduces this amount of time for direct services by 10.53 hours. Next slide. Similarly, for speech, you see the same. You see 224.5 hours if you calculate it. Next slide. Again, this matches the budgeted hours from the administration slide. Next slide. And if you calculate lunch and prep time again, you'll see that there's a 40.37 error difference. Next slide. However, there's one additional problem on the speech slide. It is shown that the speech time is in more trouble since the delivery hours are now greater than the available time for direct services. Speech, for example, shows underwater in these calculations, which I know earlier today we had a proposal that there's excess time for the speech that they would then be able to do literacy instruction. But what is shown in this data is our speech pathologists aren't even able to take lunch with the current hours for those. And also just to add, literacy instruction and speech instruction are very different skill sets. There's different educational background, there's different training, and you can't just repurpose a speech pathologist as a literacy pathologist.
Next slide then. So let's review. Dan has just explained to you that the only thing that was measured in this spreadsheet was service delivery. It was budgeted that every second of the day, Dr. Kavanaugh expects that our school-based therapists are to be doing service delivery only, the top of the iceberg. This logic cannot be used to propose any changes in staffing. The fact that the administration is now offering less cuts is still not acceptable. CPAC does not accept any cuts because the data does not support it. The decision to cut even a little is just as flawed, and we are not valuing what therapists are saying. The new cuts in speech therapy, while on paper is not a cut, more duties will be given, and now it is suggested that speech therapists should teach reading without establishing whether they're even qualified to do so. So regardless, the data does not show that they would even have the time. Adding another task is still considered a cut to services, no matter what it looks like on a spreadsheet. So all of this suggests that the approach to staffing in special education is woefully inadequate. Next slide. So I want to now focus on the second slide, but I'm really sorry to therapists that I'm showing this again, because I know how offensive it is and it hurts my heart. I even have to put it up again. This slide is derived from the data in the spreadsheet that Dan has just showed you is incorrect. The expectation is unrealistic, the metric is flawed, yet this slide was shown multiple times in multiple meetings to both the school committee and the select board. Next slide. What this slide is telling us is that what is expected is service delivery or budgeted hours. Next slide. And any time spent doing anything besides the top of that iceberg, even eating your lunch, is considered a loss to the district. Keep in mind too that some therapists are even expected to provide things like lunch coverage and bus duties by their building principal, and those tasks, by the metric that's being measured, puts the therapist at a disadvantage because other educators would not be penalized for doing these tasks, but obviously by this, they would be. So these are facts. The proposed staffing levels are the lowest that they have been in 15 years. The data presented does not show what administration is saying it shows. The decision to cut is nothing more than a feeling or a guess, and the facts say otherwise. You can't argue with data. There is no proof that any of this will work. None. There's been no other data provided to us. Consultant reports do not reference anything about Hopkinton being overstaffed for therapies. This is deeply troubling. This will cost us. Once these positions are gone, we can't get them back overnight. And who loses in this scenario? The kids. The kids who are reportedly at the center of everything we do. Next slide. So there are tangible costs. These are things that have a price tag of real money. Litigation costs money. Out of district placements cost money. If we can't fulfill IEP obligations, we'll need to hire contractors to fill that void, and they're expensive and hard to find. Those will be interesting numbers in the years to come to triangulate. But there are things you can't quantify. We're deeply worried about the effect that these types of proposals have on staff morale. It is hard to retain staff when you treat them poorly, when you dismiss their concerns, when you insinuate that they're not working hard. How likely are they to stay here rather than move elsewhere to a district that maybe they'll be better respected? The trust of families has been significantly eroded. Parents labeled as emotional when they're reacting exactly how you would expect when presented with something that on its face is absurd. So going forward, how can CPAC trust data? Can we accept data at face value when it's presented in the future? Because these last 2 months have shown that the approach the district is taking to determine staffing in special education, reckless at best. So this is an effort to save the district $32,000. To put that into perspective, it's the tiny orange sliver in the huge green donut that's next year's budget. I'm not sure if you can even see the slice on the screen, but it's there and it's orange. In a budget so big, why are we so determined to cut this little amount from our most vulnerable students when teachers, therapists, and parents are telling you it's a bad idea? The tiny little sliver. So what we're hoping that the school committee will take from this presentation tonight is that the decisions made by administration with respect to staffing is leaving out key stakeholders. The decision to reduce therapy services was not data driven, and the role of our therapy providers does not seem to be truly understood by administration. Next slide. So in closing, CPAC feels that any cuts to special education are not supported by data and should not be approved by the school committee. We need to start listening to teachers when they say they need more student-facing staff. Our educators are the reason we live in the best school district in the state of Massachusetts. Our educators. It baffles me why we're not listening to them and trusting them when they say they need help. And thirdly, we should be looking to CPAC as an advisory board and a stakeholder, just as we should with teachers. Anything you want to add, Dan?
I thought it was good.
Yeah. Anything you want to say at the end to take it home? Good?
No, I think that's it. Thanks.
All right, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Happy to answer any questions.
I actually do have a question on the data, just because I actually truly don't know. So in the last 4 years, we've added almost 40 paras. What do the paras do in terms of the part under the iceberg? Like
Paras, I'm only talking about therapists. I'm only talking about speech therapists.
So I think
right,
great
but
question.
I'm asking in terms of the support structure for the therapists that are
She's
here.
asking,
what do they do?
Can someone else do the work under the iceberg?
Or do they do the work, right?
So
if we've added 40 of them.
So I think you're asking, can a para plan what the speech pathology plan is? Could she make a plan for what that child's?
Or any one of the things, like I'm not trying to say, can they do like one of the, but, do they do some consults? Do they do some, and I honestly don't know.
Paras
this
have
is
the
an
time?
honest question, right? If we added 40 of them, what do they do in terms of support for all of the staff that's there?
I think that's not in our wheelhouse to answer. That would be a question for maybe Dr. Zaleski.
Yeah, I think I could attempt, right, for the, I'm a layperson, right, for those, but what's below is, so imagine going to a doctor's office, right? Can his, office staff tell you what medicines you should take, what treatment plans? This is the therapist planning how they're going to take care of this deficit the child has, how they get them to be successful on their IEP. How did they teach him how to make a beat? A para can't work through a meeting to tell the speech pathologist, oh, this is how we're going to, when this new patient comes in, or student, we're going to treat him this way. These are all how the therapist plans for their direct service delivery. It's prep.
Yeah, Leah, I can tell you that a paraprofessional would not be able to sort of supplant a therapist.
Right, I'm not asking in terms. So
no, I know.
What I was trying to say is, you said a medical professional, a doctor, right? So, like the nurse does X amount. I don't know, and it's like I said, totally honest question. I don't know what the para does as a supporting factor for the staff we have here. Because when I looked at the 4 years, I saw, you're right, we haven't grown these other things, but we have this growth of 40 paras. So has that been a supporting structure for the people that are there, or are they doing completely separate things?
Typically, they don't work with therapists. They would have more work with classroom teachers. They would have more work with being paired one-to-one with students. If it's an ABA para, they have almost an entirely different job, or an entirely unique job. And we have interesting classrooms that are set up where you might have 2 gen ed teachers, a special education liaison, and a paraprofessional, and they kind of go through and do what we would call sort of that co-trio, right? So we have added a lot of paraprofessionals, and I think the support that they give to our teachers and our kids, it's invaluable, like what they do, but not necessarily.
But not in that sense.
Right, they would not go and support.
That's all I wanted to know in terms of the numbers I was seeing.
Thank you.
There's like specialized
Speech pathologist here can answer that.
all that in general, not
Right, they're licensed for very specific tasks.
Okay.
and all of those you would need to be
You want to
licensed
speak,
to.
would you go to the microphone, please?
So, just that all of those tasks, so I'm Christina Medeiros, I'm a speech language pathologist. So all of those tasks that fall underneath,
in general, aside from like duties, would be things that you would need to be licensed, right?
Okay.
That you have a master's degree to do that. There are SLPAs or OTAs, those people are also licensed by the state, so as medical providers, that would need to be a para or an assistant. Where paras help, I think SLPs, is in generally like carryover, right? So we support our paras in training what we're working on, and they can support with carryover, but that's none of those things.
Okay, thank you so much. That's super helpful.
Other questions? Holly, are you still there?
No.
Okay.
I just have a couple of, they're not exactly questions, I guess, but looking at things like the 15-year history, I always get a little, I don't know, I get a little uneasy about drawing conclusions over 15 years because I don't know, I'm not a professional in this realm, and really in any data, because the way we go about teaching differs. I don't know how we're using, clearly we've added like 100 students who are on IEPs, and our staffing hasn't changed, and yet we hear repeatedly from families that our services are excellent. So I can't draw a lot of conclusions. My gut says, well, shouldn't we be growing proportionally to the population? Because that's what my gut says. That's what everyone's sort of intuition says we should. How can we possibly have fewer of, one therapist than we had in 2007? That doesn't even make logical sense if what we're doing is the same. So I just will say, for me personally, looking backwards, I'd have to have a whole lot of conversations with Dr. Zaleski or, Dr. Kavanaugh, the providers, to really understand how we have gotten here, doing a good job. We've been through lots of rounds of contract renegotiations, whatever. We haven't heard, major outcries of, oh my gosh, we need 15 more of this, or, So I get a little nervous looking backwards. Looking forward, obviously we know there's going to be growth, so I appreciate the look forward, just making sure that we're ready and prepared. I guess the question that always comes to mind for me too is, we all know, I've heard Dr. Kavanaugh and Dr. Zaleski and all of you say that the job is not just time facing the student delivering the therapy. There's a whole lot. You're under the iceberg picture. In Dr. Kavanaugh's slide that you didn't want to re-show, I know there's an acknowledgement of, that buffer time. No one in these jobs should be scheduled fully, 100%. I haven't heard anyone say that every minute should be scheduled.
But that's what the data is showing.
But what it showed was, again, I think the wording on the slide, I try to look at the content and not the wording if I, disagree, but I think there was at the bottom, from remembering, a planned cushion, we'll say. And what I guess I'm curious about is, do we have any kind of agreed understanding of how much cushion should a speech therapist, a typical speech therapist have in their day? Is there some sort of a guideline or something that we can agree on? And maybe that's something we come to once we have more information, or in OT, we know they're not going to be 100% scheduled with kids. What is the right cushion? I don't know. There is some amount of meeting time, and planning time, and et cetera. So I would love to hear, maybe not tonight, but at some point, just a sense of what we all think is the right cushion.
Yes.
Yes, and I will say, and I won't get too far down that road, but when we met with the providers, in many of those meetings, we did say things like it would be our expectation that in a 32.75 hour week, that you'd be doing direct services for 20 of those hours, which would leave you 12.75 hours, and that would give you 2.5 hours for lunch, 3.3 hours for preparation, your prep period, 4 hours for evaluations, 1 hour for IEP meetings. And those data were really based on looking at, from September to where we are now, on average, how many IEP meetings did each person have? And it's about one I think we decided it was about one a week. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm sorry,
we've done a lot of that data dive.
Right, so, and I really do appreciate that, and I appreciate the presentation, and I know that you're working hard to get an independent because that's the role of CPAC, is to be there to give an independent lens. So I appreciate that. I do want to say, absolutely, our services are hinging on our amazing educators and our amazing providers, but I firmly believe that we are a system. Like, I think the administration is strong, the school committee, my colleagues anyway, maybe not me, but strong. Like, I think it's a system that makes Hopkinton Hopkinton, and I appreciate that it's not just any one piece. And if you took any piece out, it wouldn't work. If you didn't have the same quality administrators, it wouldn't work. It just wouldn't. You might not see it right away, but you'd see it in 2 years. Like, if you took the teachers out, we'd feel it immediately. If you changed the school committee, had different school committee members, I think, you could potentially see a different in a different environment as well. So I think it is a system, and CPAC as well. I think we all need to work together. So I love that this topic began with, a recommendation, an observation of missing information, people coming forward, and then more dialogue over the last couple of weeks, and a revision. As I said before, I still am not 100% sure how I'm digesting the OT cut. I still am thinking about that, but I don't want to lose sight of the fact that we all have to work together in an ecosystem. Like, I think that's what really makes Hopkinton amazing. So, just want to say that.
Can I add one more thing? I'm very task-based, so I asked the data question first, but I want to say I know that you guys worked a ton of them, like personal hours, digesting a lot of data, and I really do appreciate all the work that went into this. So I do this all the time. I ask data questions, and then I realize that I should have really led with thank you for all of this freaking work, because this was a lot of work on your part, and it's all volunteer work. So thank you. That's all I wanted to say.
If I could just add, I think we asked the exact same questions that you did, right, at CPAC. In order to figure out this cushion, which is kind of the theme, right, for this, I think we first need to know how many students are receiving those services. Yeah. That's in dispute. If you don't have that number, that should be a solid number. I mean, you guys are data people. If we don't know that number, how can we make any of these decisions? Like, that's what we're trying to get to.
And there was no subject matter expert in the negotiations of whether we're overstaffed. The decision to decide, the decision was made by administrators. There was no person who actually knew what a therapist does to say, hey, well, they could probably do that, or, oh, they're not working hard enough. Nobody, just schedules were looked at, some empty spots, there's not enough grouping. Very concerning to parents.
Any questions that,
I would just say that I think it was more complicated than, that, but.
Well, if there's more data that you can provide to us that says that cuts are needed, I'm happy to see it, but I haven't seen anything yet that is compelling at all.
I did think the provider meetings were very valuable in coming to an agreement on how many therapists each of the therapists had on their caseload in resolving some of the discrepancies in the initial data.
We did look at caseload and workload.
Mm-hmm.
I want to also thank, if I may, first of all, Ms. Halliday, for I know that we were able to get you a good amount of information. I'm hearing tonight that it sounds like it might not have met the needs that you were hoping it would. But I want to publicly thank my colleagues who, from our administrative assistant staff up to my counterparts, finding the data, and I know you referenced the Freedom of Information Act requests that you did share. I think it's important to note that the district, and I think it's commendable of the district, that not only was information that was available provided, but in the statutory relationship that the district has with CPAC, which we're all aware of under the MGL, that we were able to actually invest a good deal of time in actually creating data points things like FTEs year to year, different things like that, which obviously there is no legal stipulation to, but I do want to publicly recognize my colleagues that did put it together. I'm sorry, it sounds like that wasn't enough.
Well, I assumed everything I was asking for was either a consultant's report that you would have and could forward to me.
Which you did get.
Or, yes, exactly, but I had to ask through a Freedom of Information request. And other things that I would have assumed would have just been an Excel spreadsheet. I didn't think that what I was asking for year-to-year FTEs, I would assume that you just go to HR and say, print me out that. I didn't think that it was going to take that many man-hours.
Yeah, some of those records we did have to create.
Interesting.
Thank you very much. I appreciate having the opportunity to come here.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
I'm happy as well, if anybody on the school committee would like to sit down, I'm very eager to have a face-to-face if you would like to. Thank you.
Jen, I would love to sit down with you and share more data if you would like to.
I forward the data, and if I have questions, I will reach out.
Okay.
Thank you both. So we are a little over time, but we were able to already go through the proposed ATM warrant article. So we have that. I do just very briefly want to touch on the annual report summary, just because there's a fixed time on that. I don't need for everybody to have read it, because I know I got it out on the late side, but what I really was mostly looking for, and I don't know if, did you guys all receive the
Yes,
the
the
draft?
email. Yeah.
That's okay. What I am looking for is if there are key things that you feel like happened in the calendar year, because the town, what they do is they take these reports and they give it out in that big booklet at town meeting. Any key either events, accomplishments, or things that happened during 2022 that you want included, you can also, I am going to have a draft available in the packet next week. If you have anything now that you know that you want to add in, I will make a note of it to include it for next week's draft.
I think one of the things, because this is kind of the story in the report, right? One of the things is we returned from COVID full time. And, it's
We
running
were full time
smoothly.
for all of 2022, but we did the off-ramping of masks.
Yeah.
Yep.
No masks. The COVID policies ramped down. The increased social emotional learning stuff and the kind of support structure around these students who, I think all of that is good to mention in whatever capacity you have in the page.
I would call out some of the policy, like the equity policy. You might want to.
I did call
Did
all
you
the
did
policies are in there.
Did you call out the financial support?
I believe I did.
Which one?
The
financial aid that we
it was
Oh
in
yeah,
finance.
the financial aid is.
That we, let me look.
That one's not, well, it's not on the short list right now, but it can, I mean, you have a lot on there, so you can add that.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. Absolutely.
And while you're adding that, this is just a thought, but and you may have done this last year when there was a student council representative last year. Was that the first year there was somebody here the whole time too?
It
I think.
was.
So I don't know if you called that out last year, but I think it would be kind of nice to recognize.
Recognize him.
Yeah, his contributions and his commitment.
Yep. And all of our names will appear at the bottom of that, so that's why it's important that we all do that. Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else you can bring next week and we can change in real time.
Okay.
So,
Okay. Sounds good.
and then you can go through how I've written and edit in that way as well.
So this is calendar year.
This is calendar year.
Okay.
May to May.
No, January to December.
Right.
Oh.
So that's why I wonder what are all the contracts?
So that's
Did
in
you
there.
put that in? I'm sorry, I didn't read it.
No, that's
I told
okay.
you I didn't read it.
I listed the, sorry, I have it pulled up on here.
Teachers, custodians.
Teachers, custodians, cafeteria workers, nurses, and school physician were all approved.
Okay.
I know.
And I only highlighted, I may not have put the financial, the the changing in the, because we didn't actually change the policy, we just changed the threshold. So I will make sure I add that back in. I did go through our minutes to pull out which specific policies we approved.
And do we want to call out like the major new hires? Like our new assistant superintendent?
Well, our new
Don't waste the space.
I certainly could. I mean, I want to make sure if we're going to do that, I get an inclusive.
Yeah. I know.
List of,
It's
Does
long.
that go in your commentary?
Yes, and I think, for example, I was reading the middle school one, and it does indicate that there's a new principal and assistant principal in that building.
Okay, that's
So it's
fine.
usually captured by building.
Okay.
Okay.
That's
Don't leave
good
Jeff
then.
out.
I'll give you a sentence, don't you worry.
A whole sentence?
You give me a sentence.
All right.
A sentence in a book, this thing.
Right.
Did we complete our security plan? You know, the 5-year security audit that we then installed the cameras and did we complete that in 2020?
I believe that was part of
That was a
this
long
past-
initiative.
Was it
Oh my
in calendar 2022?
I believe
Yes.
it was.
Okay.
It was a long.
We have the policy in there.
Yes. Yes, but sometimes I pulled things that I didn't get the deeper dive on.
Calendar year 2020. What the heck? What about our goals?
It's so
We established school committee goals. Did you want to say that?
Yeah, that's good.
Which we probably will be doing a check-in on soon.
Post-budget.
Okay.
Okay.
Post-budget and post-school configuration.
And we're able to vote this piece on the 19th to get it in on time to the town. So next week we'll have a draft and there'll still be another week to go back and add things or think of things that are not in what I bring back next week. All right, so I would recommend that we bring our future agenda items. If people want to email those,
Sure.
that would just to jump over a little bit of time since we're so far over and then move us into items by consensus, Dr. Kavanaugh.
Okay, as superintendent, I recommend the school committee approve the items by consensus as outlined in your agenda.
So moved.
Motion by Leah, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Jen, all those in favor?
Yes.
Aye. And those pass, and then I would seek a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion by Jen, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Leah, all those in favor?
Yes.
Aye, and we are adjourned at 10:15. Just a reminder for folks at home that we are having a listening session this Sunday at 7 p.m. to listen to more folks on the budget ahead of our public hearing. And our next public meeting will be on January 12th and then on January 19th. Thank you all for hanging in there.
Holly's gone, right? So
Yes,
those are
Holly is
4-0
gone, so that's,
votes. I
yes,
just wanna-
and that's why I did not do a roll call vote on that.
What do we decide then?
All right, thank you, everybody, and have a good night.
All right, thank you.